Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for coming to Wenham's 2024 annual town meeting, which serves as the town's legislative session. For those of you who do not know me, I am Roger Smerridge, your town moderator. I thank you for taking time out of your lovely spring Saturday to participate in this very important part of the democratic process. Now, a few notes before we get started. First, today's meeting is being broadcast live and it's also being recorded. Second, any voters not in the designated voter areas will not be counted by me or, if necessary, our tellers. Third, appointing season for fiscal year 2025 is right around the corner. Among other openings, 2 seats on the Finance Committee will be up for appointment. Additional details can be found on the FinCom's page of the town website. If you are interested in submitting a letter of interest for FinCom or any of the other town boards or committees that have vacancies, please contact the town administrator's office. A few introductions are also in order. To my left, up here on the stage, we have Town Council Lauren Goldberg of KP Law, Town Clerk Kirsten Alexander, Assistant Town Administrator Joseph Pesamato, Executive Assistant to the Town Administrator Michelle McGovern, and Peter Babel from Meridia Voting Systems. Seated in front of the stage to my right are were the Town Administrator Steve Poulos, who just jumped out for a second, but will be right back, as well as the members of the Select Board, Chair Diane Bucco, Vice Chair Peter Clay, Clerk Gary Cheeseman, Deirdre Parati, and Benjamin Timon. Seated in front of the stage to my left, we have the Finance and Advisory Committee, consisting of Chair Jeff Calder, David Harnish, Dan Ojikonovich, Scott Schoenberger, and Phineas Sprague. They are joined by Jeff Soulard, our Finance Director and Town Accountant. Now, we are making use of the multipurpose room today as either overflow space or also providing closed captioning for those who need it on the video in that room. I do want to let everyone know, sitting in the multipurpose room rather than here in the gym does not alter in any way one's ability to participate in today's meeting. Your votes will be counted just the same as everyone else's, and you can speak here in the gym when recognized by me and the moderator. Just talk to the assistant moderator who will be appointed in a few minutes, and he can help you come into the gym if you want to speak at any point. So, in order to make this process run smoothly, I do need to appoint an assistant moderator to oversee things over in the multipurpose room and to confer with me on votes and procedural matters. The assistant moderator will be vested with the same powers as me, except for the power to recognize a speaker or to declare a vote. In short, the assistant moderator will help ensure that today's meeting runs in an orderly fashion despite the use of overflow or alternative space. At this time, pursuant to Chapter 39, Section 14 of the General Laws, I hereby appoint David Anderson to serve as today's assistant moderator. I would now ask David to come forward and ask Town Clerk Kirsten Alexander to swear in David as today's assistant moderator.
Do you, David Anderson, solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially perform your duties as Assistant Moderator for the Town of Wenham to the best of your knowledge and ability, according to the bylaws of the town, the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the Constitution of the United States?
I do.
Okay. Please sign the book. You can do it over here.
Thank you, Clerk Alexander. Thank you, David, for serving today. Once you're done signing the forms, you can head to or near the multipurpose room and help any residents that choose to sit in there. Next, could I ask all residents who are able and willing to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, thank you. I want to thank the town officials and staff for helping to organize and execute another safe and hopefully expeditious town meeting. I would also like to thank the people who are assisting with the check-in process and any vote counting that should be necessary. Finally, I want to recognize certain residents and town employees who have stepped down in the last year who are completing their final term in office. Please hold your applause until I finish. Can we get that slide up, Michelle? For the recognitions. I'm not seeing the slide. Bear with us. Thought we had this down. All right, well, while we're trying to work out the technical issue, I'll read off the recognitions. So we would like to recognize Evan Campbell. Mr. Campbell resigned from the ZBA this year after serving since 2017. Fire Lieutenant Thomas Curran. Lieutenant Curran resigned after 30 years of service with the fire department. John Cusalito. Mr. Cusalito resigned from the Hamilton-Wenham Joint Recreation Board, on which he served from 2014 until 2023. Mr. Cusalito also served on the Community Preservation Committee. Sean Davis, the Parks Foreman, retired after 40 years of service. The DPW maintenance garage here in town was named after Mr. Davis last year. Mark Liphart. Mr. Liphart served as Water Commissioner for 6 years. Police Sergeant Christopher McCain. Sergeant McCain retired after 30 years of service. Richard Osgood. Mr. Osgood served on the Veterans Committee for 3 years. And finally, Fire Call Deputy Dan Sullivan. Deputy Sullivan retired after 28 years of service. We thank you all for your service to the town. As is our tradition, we will now recognize the residents who passed away during the last year, whose names are listed on the screen. Please join me in a moment of silence to show our respect to these residents and their families. Thank you. I would now like to acknowledge Senator Bruce Tarr and Representative Sally Cairns, along with Representative Gerald Paracella. They have been keeping the Select Board, Finance Committee, and School Committee up to date with information from Beacon Hill, and we thank them for their advocacy and support. Although typically only Wenham residents are permitted to speak at town meeting, I would like to give the Senator and Representative roughly 5 minutes apiece to update the residents on any developments from the State House. As such, the moderator recognizes Senator Bruce Tarr.
Of town meeting, I want to compliment you, Mr. Moderator, on being able to trigger an enormous rainstorm just at the time we needed people to come in for a quorum. I knew that you were incredibly resourceful. I did not know how much so until this morning.
Thank you,
or this afternoon. And thank you to everyone who has come out for town meeting. It's an important aspect of the life of the town, and it's great to see so many people here undertaking that. So Representative Cairns and I wanted to come and give you just a brief update of what's happening on Beacon Hill. And I'm going to share with you some news that is not incredibly uplifting, so I'm going to prepare you for that. But we are experiencing really a pivot with regard to revenue in state government. We have, over the last number of years, been experiencing robust tax returns and revenue collections that have enabled us to be able to fund a great many programs and embark on a great number of spending priorities that we all share. We are now at the point in time where state revenue collections have declined significantly. It's not a cause for alarm, but it is something that we all need to understand as we gather to make financial decisions such as the ones that you're going to make here today. And specifically, what I mean is that in the current fiscal year that we're in right now, fiscal year 2024 in Massachusetts, the governor, not a very long time ago, had to revise the benchmark upon which our budget is based by $1 billion, indicating that we were planning on collecting $1 billion less than the budget was based on. And we were able to make adjustments to the budget to be able to cover those things. There were some cuts, but the budget was balanced. We have since that time been underperforming even the revised benchmark, although March was actually a positive month and it brought us closer to being even. So we're still between $150 and $200 million below the benchmark for this fiscal year that our budget is based on. But we're optimistic that before the end of the fiscal year, at the end of June and the beginning of July, that we're going to be able to close that gap. But what that means is, as we begin to debate the state budget, and the House and Representative Kearns and her colleagues will take the budget up in April, the Senate will take it up in May, is that we have to pay careful attention to our ability to maintain funding for our priorities. And as part of that, the governor has filed her version of the fiscal year 2025 budget, and in that budget, the town would see a very modest increase of about $50,000 in its Chapter 70 account for both Hamilton and Wenham in terms of the regional school. And with regard to unrestricted general government aid, so-called local aid, the town would see only about a $10,000 increase in that. But I think it's important to note that those are not cuts. Those are what we think that we'll be able to sustain. Obviously, when Representative Kearns and I and Representative Paracella begin budget debate, these will be among our priorities, trying to maintain sound funding for our schools and for our local government. And it is anticipated that we may be able to improve on the numbers I just read to you just a bit, but not to the extent that we've been able to do so in the last few years. That being said, I think it's also important to recognize that our stabilization fund, which is really a testament to our fiscal discipline in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, is projected at the end of this fiscal year to have over $8 billion. And if we do see a worsening of our revenue collection, that will help us to be able to maintain funding and services in the face of any kind of a fiscal storm. In addition to that, we also have a set aside for the Student Opportunity Act, so we are very confident that we'll be able to continue to fund our commitment to public schools in Chapter 70. But beyond that, a lot of things will be considered for belt tightening. So I'm here to apprise you of that, but also not to sound an alarm, merely to indicate that things are changing, and the number of years that we had with very robust tax returns are not here with us today. We hope that those times will return, but in the meantime, in the legislature, we'll work very, very hard, A, to make sure we have a balanced budget, B, to make sure every penny that we have is spent prudently, and C, to make sure that our partners in local government are given the resources that they need. And speaking of that, I know that the entire legislative delegation very much appreciates the relationship that we have with your finance committee, with your select board, with your school committee, and most of all, your town administrator, whom we work with quite frequently and tends to be the conduit for communication for the other boards and committees in town. We do appreciate that very much, and it's that partnership that has enabled the legislative delegation to be able to maximize the benefit of state government for the town over the years, and we expect that relationship will continue to yield that benefit and that dividend. That being said, I hope the remainder of town meeting is successful and productive, and I hope that you will not be here when the sun goes down. So that being said, thank you all very much. It's an honor to represent you in the Senate.
The moderator will now recognize Representative Kearns.
Good afternoon to the wonderful town of Wenham. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Serving with Senator Tarr means that one often approaches the microphone when just about everything has been said. So I'm learning the only thing between the start of this meeting and all of you is me. So I just want to reiterate my thanks for the work and the welcoming that you've all provided. We are working hard. We did pass, in addition to all that the senator said, we passed several $1 million in road funding the other day, and some of it designed for smaller communities. And I must say, it has been a tremendous education to see the challenges for our rural communities, and even more rural than here in Wenham. So that was welcome news. Thank you very much. Good luck with your proceedings today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kearns. Now it's time to turn to the business of the meeting. Our town bylaws require that we have a quorum of 120 registered voters. I have been advised by the town clerk that quorum has been met, so I now officially call this meeting to order. We will omit the return of the warrant, which shows that it was properly served. Today, we will be using electronic voting as our primary means of voting. We will resort to the orange voter cards in the event of a technical issue. Each voter received both a clicker and a voting card at check-in. If you are a registered voter but did not check in and obtain a clicker and a card, please see the election officers at the check-in table in the vestibule at the back of the gym. If you don't have a clicker or a voting card, you will not be able to vote. Now, when putting a motion to vote using the clickers, I will announce that the voting is open. Anyone in favor of the motion should press the green 1A button on their clicker. Anyone opposed to the motion should press the red 2B button on the clicker. And you should, in the little window, you should see an OK, I think it is what shows up when you vote. So after a brief period, I will then announce that voting is closing. Although you can change your vote while the voting is open, only your last vote selection at the time of closing will be counted. Then I will declare the vote. Now, the clickers have not been registered to individual voters, so no names will appear on the screen, and no record of each voter's individual vote will be maintained. To ensure that the clickers are running properly, however, we do need to now run a test vote. During this vote, the clicker number on the back of your clicker will appear on the screen and will turn blue when you place your vote. If you believe that there is a problem with your clicker, please come to one of the microphones and raise a point of order. We will then work to resolve any problems before proceeding. If there are technical problems that we can't resolve, as I said, we will then resort to the voting cards, and I'll explain that process a little bit more if we need it. So, I would now ask that we put the test vote up on the big screen. And apropos of last night, where the Seas squeaked out a win over the Sacramento Kings, we're going to go with, will the Celtics win the NBA championship? So I'm going to open the voting. Again, press 1, the green button, if you think yes. Press 2, the no button, if you think no. And let's give this a test. So go ahead. Voting is now open. All right, now I'm going to close the vote. And we think the Celts are going to win the championship. We're optimistic today. I love it. Anyone having any technical issues with their clickers?
Not with the clicker, but the light blue is so close to the white that if we could just turn off one of these lights, it would help us all see it a lot better.
Unfortunately, with the new light configuration, to turn off any of the lights here, we have to turn off the entire first 2 rows of lights. And it gets very dark up here on the stage if we do that. Yeah, there's an example. So if you, the blue is lighter. This is the only time we'll be using the grid. If you need to look at the smaller monitors, just to double check, you can do that. Those have a little bit more definition.
You're going to tell them what they're voting on. You're going to tell them what they're voting on.
Right.
Say.
Right. So Unless anyone seems like they're having a problem with their clickers, which I don't see anyone. Oh, we've got one. Sir, did you get a new clicker? Okay. All right. Why don't we run one more test vote just so this gentleman can make sure his clicker is good? Why don't we, we've got another one? Okay, go ahead and see the, we're going to give it 1 minute. Apparently one other person has an issue with their clicker.
What I was trying to say is, like, they don't need to, you have to tell them what
I know, but I won't. Right.
I know.
Yeah.
That's why they shouldn't worry that much.
Right. And just to be clear, once we're doing the actual voting on the motions, the motions will be read, I will describe what the vote is, and the text on all the screens will appear bigger as well. All right, so did the other gentleman who was having an issue with his clicker get a new one? Okay, let's go ahead and do another test vote, folks. We're going to just use the same question. We're going to see if the crowd still thinks the Celtics are going to win the championship. I'm going to go ahead. No, he's all set. Thank you, Jeff, though. All right, let's go ahead and open the voting. Will the Celtics win the NBA championship? 1 for yes, green 1 for yes, red 2B for no. Give it a couple of seconds. And let's go ahead and close the vote. Okay, we still think the Celtics are going to win the championship. They love it. Again, just double check, see if your clicker number shows up in blue. That means your vote is being registered, and we can get going. All right. So, now that we've got the test votes out of the way, as noted in the warrant book, the conduct of our meeting is governed by the rules of town meeting time, a special set of parliamentary procedures developed by the Massachusetts Moderators Association for New England town meetings. My responsibilities as your town moderator include presiding over and regulating the proceedings, deciding questions of order, declaring votes, and granting leave to address the meeting. To ensure that we have an orderly meeting and that people who want to speak are able to do so, permission of the moderator is required to address the meeting. As always, if you wish to speak on a motion, please come to one of the microphones and wait to be recognized. When you ask to be recognized, please state your name and address for the record. We will use the same rules today that we use at every town meeting. There will be a 3-minute speaking maximum per resident per article during debate. After 3 minutes have passed, I'll hold up my hand to let you know that your time is up. Please wrap up your remarks as soon as you see me put up my hand. If you continue speaking, other than to wrap up, my obligations to maintain a fair and efficient meeting require that I move on to the next speaker. 3 minutes, however, is not selected at random. To quote a long-serving moderator from the town of Andover, 3 minutes is enough for anyone. After 5, you put them to sleep. After 7, they're going to vote against you, even if they agree with you. So that gives you some sense why we cap each resident's remarks on an article at 3 minutes. Now, please remember, we are in a legislative session today for the town of Wenham. We are here today with our friends and neighbors. While we all agree that spirited debate is welcome, we recognize that being cordial and respectful is a priority for the efficiency of the meeting, and that every person who rises to debate on a motion has an equal right to be heard. We understand that not everyone feels the same way about all issues, and truly, we wouldn't want them to. That is the essence of democracy. However, we do want people to feel comfortable participating in the meeting, sharing their opinions, and asking questions. As such, at this meeting, like all town meetings, we expect people to refrain from making remarks of a personal nature, whether directed at an elected or appointed official, a town or school district staff, or any of your fellow registered voters. Again, to ensure that the meeting is run efficiently, any comments or questions from those attending town meeting should be directed to me, the moderator, rather than to the boards, committee members, other registered voters, or prior speakers. Town meeting is not a forum for cross-examination of presenters or other speakers. If necessary, should a question arise, and if I deem it appropriate, I may then ask the person making the motion, or another town official if appropriate, to address the question as best can be done. Applauding, cheering, or for that matter, booing a speaker's remarks disrupts and delays the meeting. Disorderly conduct is grounds for removal from the meeting after a warning, but I hope that won't be necessary today. While we have a number of non-residents in attendance, we generally only allow residents to speak on the articles in the warrant. However, I will assume that the meeting is comfortable allowing the town administrator, department heads, the superintendent of schools or members of his team, and town council to speak when they have relevant information and after being recognized by the moderator. If any other non-resident wishes to speak on a particular matter, they may request to do so through the moderator, and if I deem the request appropriate and informative, I will ask town meeting to vote on that request. Hearing no objections, I declare that the rules of the meeting, including those concerning voting and non-resident speaking, have been approved by unanimous consent. With those last few preliminary matters taken care of, we can now turn to the warrant. The warrant before us presents 22 articles, 5 of which are proposed as a consent calendar. And Michelle, can we get that summary of the articles up on the screens? Thank you. As the text of each article already appears in your warrant book and will appear on the screen, we will waive the reading of the articles by unanimous consent and move on. Hearing no objections, I declare the reading waived. Each article advises the town meeting of the topic to be addressed. Please note the inclusion in the warrant book of recommendations and commentary on each article. The purpose of the commentaries is to give you some idea of what each article does and why it is on the warrant. Please also note the handouts that were on your chair regarding certain articles. And I note in particular, there might not have been enough for some of the seats in the back or in the multipurpose room. We do still have plenty of handouts up here in the front on these front couple of rows if you need the handouts. Now, articles themselves are not motions. As town meeting time helpfully explains, an article is not self-starting. It merely stakes out the limits of the area within which the meeting may act. Nothing affirmative may happen, and the moderator may not take a vote unless someone makes a motion. So, for each article, I will see if the board, committee, or individual advancing the article in question wishes to make a main motion. If a motion is made and receives a second, we will then take up any questions, comments, or proposed amendments to the motion and ultimately vote on the motion. If no motion is made or the motion is not seconded, we'll move on to the next article. To ensure that the record is clear on what town meeting is voting upon, and to ensure that the clerk can prepare complete minutes of today's meeting, I ask that any substantive amendments to a motion be made in writing and presented to the town moderator and clerk as appropriate. If necessary, we do have a form available should any voter wish to make a motion that they have not prepared in advance. If you'd like that, you can just come up and either ask the town clerk or myself, and we can give you that form. Additional ground rules for our town meeting are set out in the note from the town moderator contained in the warrant book. And with that, let's turn to the articles. Article 1, Status of the Master Plan, Planning Board Report. This article simply proposes to hear a report from the Planning Board on the status of the master plan. It's not going to be a forum for discussion, questions, or debate about the master planning process. Now, if Deirdre Parati of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 1, I will entertain the motion.
Move to approve Article 1 as printed in the warrant.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. I will now open debate, but the debate is limited to whether or not to hear the Planning Board's report. Any substantive comments or questions about the master plan will be ruled out of order. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? Seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on the motion under Article 1. A yes vote means that you want to hear the Planning Board's report. A no vote means that you do not. That's all. You are not voting on the master plan itself. A vote on this motion requires a majority vote. So let's go ahead and open the voting. Again, press 1 for yes, press 2 for no. We're going to give it a couple more seconds, so I'll close the voting in a couple of seconds. Remember, it's your last vote that counts. You can change it, but it's your last vote that counts. So I'm going to go ahead and close the voting. And I declare that the motion passes 112 to 30. So I will now recognize Ann Weeks of the master plan of the Planning Board to deliver the report on the master plan.
Thank you for agreeing to hear me. Taking the advice of the moderator that if I speak for my entire 10 minutes, you will all leave. I will not do that. There are some slides. You can see them here. Thank you for agreeing to hear me again. I will be brief. You'll remember that in 2021, I believe it was, town authorized $125 for fiscal year 2022 to complete a master plan for Wenham for the first time since, yes, the mid-'60s. We had not had a master plan. We also had a state grant of $75,000 to help us with this effort. And just to let you know, having a current state master plan is actually a state requirement. It makes us eligible for certain state funding. So additionally, and most critically, it will guide our efforts as we move into the future as we consider development requests across the town. So we hired J.M. Goldson, who's a woman-owned planning consultancy, to work with us on all aspects of developing the updated Wenham Master Plan, and with a subcontract to Cambridge Econometrics, which was specific to Wenham, to look specifically at economic development options of various kinds and how those might or might not affect Wenham's fiscal outlook. So could I have slide 2? So before I briefly, and I will be brief, explain the process and how you can comment on the plan, which is now available in draft form for public review, I'd like to give huge thanks to the Master Plan Advisory Committee and also to the planning staff. While this is technically a project of the Planning Board, we wanted this effort to be as inclusive as possible, and we asked for volunteers to work with the consultant to assure that all points of view were considered. The Master Plan Advisory Committee was appointed and includes the following people, and if you're here today, I would really love to recognize you, so would you please stand up? Joanne Frisella was the chair. Deirdre Pirati was the vice chair. The members were Kirsten Alexander, Ernest Ashley, Erica Ciampa, Sue Patriola, Phil Colarusso, Deb Evans, David Frankel, Dano Djukanovich, and Marty Lowry. So I really, really appreciate the effort that these people put into this plan. Going to eat up most of my time saying thank yous, which is appropriate, I think, in this instance. I'd also like to recognize other members of the Planning Board who gave their time and effort to the project, attending meetings, updating the public, and generally supporting us. David Anderson, Peter Clay, Daniel Pasquarello, and Rick Woodland all gave very generously of their time. And town staff Steve Poulos, Kate Mallory, Margaret Hoffman, and Michelle McGovern also were instrumental in making this process, which was long, detailed, and open work. So could I have slide 3, please? Very briefly, here is what the process looked like for Wenham. We did this in 4 phases. Phase 1, which started in June 2022, was understanding and documenting our history and where we are now. Phase 2 started in November 2022 to May of last year and was a core visioning effort. We really sought to gather input on what is important to the town now and looking forward. We used surveys, open public meetings, and meetings in a box, which were gatherings at people's homes. And we had a really significant amount of public participation in the process, which I believe is really well reflected in the plan. So could I have slide 4, please? Taking the information we got at phase 2 and with the understanding of the information we had at phase 1, our consultants ran 5 working sessions to allow staff and current and former members of town boards to weigh in on various topics. This phase also included broader community outreach through a survey on the draft strategy list and a land use visioning plan. Now we are at the end of phase 4, which has included pulling together all of the documentation for the effort and generating the plan itself. Could I have slide 5, please? Slide 5, please. The next one. The next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. I want to get through this for you so we can go on to the next thing. I don't want to characterize the plan for you because I would like everyone here to have a look at it and give us your feedback. But I can say I think it is reflective of the broadest possible community participation. And here's a summary of what we heard. Based on, and that's up here for you, I'm not going to read it to you. The plan reflects the 10-year vision for the town. People love Wenham's small-town vibe, and we want to protect that and our natural resources and history while also pursuing strategic economic development opportunities. We want to strive to be more inclusive, including through more diverse housing, and we also want to maintain educational excellence. The implementation strategies and the land use map that is part of the master plan, I really hope you'll take a look at it, really reflects these goals. So this is the most important part. If you go to the very last slide, please. You have on your seat also these handouts. Wenham's master plan in draft form is available for public comment until April 19th. While I'm talking about that in the process after that, you can use your phone if you have it to find the plan draft by using this little square space, I don't know what to call it, mark. There are also copies of the plan available at Town Hall. There are copies on the town website. Please pull it, take a look at it. Anyone on the planning board, I'm sure, would be interested to talk to anyone who has questions, although not at this meeting. This is just for information. The planning board will be discussing the draft plan at our next meeting, which is April 17th at 7 p.m. And the process after the close of the comment is for us to consider all of the comments received, reflect those in the plan, send the plan to the select board, and then the select board will send it on to the state. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks for your attention to this. You can see Margaret Hoffman's number is on the slide. I think these slides will also be available where all of the town meeting information is kept. So if anyone has any questions, please reach out. She will tell you how to get a hold of any of us. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Ann. All right, on to Article 2. Increase veteran and senior tax work-off abatement from $1,500 to $2,000. If David Harnish of the Finance Committee wishes to make the main motion under Article 2, I will entertain the motion.
Move to increase to the maximum tax deduction available to seniors and veterans under the Senior and Veteran Tax Work-Off Programs in accordance with General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5K, and Section 5N.
Thank you, David. And before I take a second, can I just ask that we advance to the motion slide? Thanks, Michelle. Excellent. Is there a second on the motion?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. I note that the warrant reflects that FinCom's recommendation is to be made here today at town meeting. What is FinCom's recommendation, Mr. Harnish?
FinCom recommends approval.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? And again, please state your name and address.
I'm from 305 Old Country Road in Wenham.
I'm sorry, could you just restate that? The mic didn't pick up your name. Sorry, sir.
Sure. Stu McGinnis, 305 Old Country Road.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. Go ahead.
Currently, under this program, you work 100 hours at $15 an hour to maximize the $1,500. Could you clarify whether or not this program increases the hourly rate from $15 to $20 an hour, requiring you to work 100 hours, or does it retain the existing $15 an hour, requiring you to work 133 hours versus the current 100?
So town council advises me that's a parameter of the program, and that is not what is being voted on. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to speak on the motion? All right, seeing none, no one else at the microphones, let's go ahead and vote on the motion under Article 2. A yes vote means that the town will increase the tax deduction. A no vote means no change. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. So I'm going to go ahead and open the voting. Again, press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Again, we'll give it a couple more seconds. You can change your vote up until the time I close the vote. Last vote counts. Give it 5 more seconds. And I'm going to go ahead and close the vote. And let's get the result up. The motion passes 129 yes, 14 no. All right, on to Article 3, our annual operating budget appropriation for town and schools. The annual operating budget for the town for fiscal year 2025, which begins July 1 of 2024 and ends June 30, 2025, is set forth in Article 3. All routine expenditures required to provide town services, including the costs for the town's share of the regional school district budget and shared service agreements, are organized by category. The Finance and Advisory Committee, working with the town administrator, select board, and department heads, compiles the annual budget and will present a motion to authorize expenditures to operate the town and provide funding therefore. After a brief overview of the budget and the town's financial condition by Finance and Advisory Committee Chair Jeff Calder, I will entertain the main motion under Article 3. Mr. Calder will then read the budget totals by department as usual. If you have a question, comment, or proposed amendment on a budget line, just say "hold" following reference to that budget line. After all categories have been read, we will then go back through the budget to address each held item. At that point, I will recognize any person that has a question, comment, or proposed amendment. Amendments to the main motion might include a change in the dollar amount proposed for an expenditure. And as these are considered substantive, I will require such amendments to be in writing. Once all such held matters have been disposed of and action taken on any amendments, the town meeting will vote on the main motion as amended, if applicable. So, Mr. Calder, could you please begin your report?
Good afternoon, everyone. Roger mentioned it in his opening remarks, but I'll put a plug in as well because small towns like Wenham survive and thrive on volunteerism. There are frequently opportunities for folks that would like to get involved, including on FinCom, and your participation is welcome and encouraged. Quick thanks to my fellow FinCom members who, beginning in August with assignments as liaisons to various town departments, and more recently with bi-weekly and then weekly meetings, have been working to review and understand the town's operating and capital budget requests to arrive at their recommendations. Thanks also to the town's department and committee heads, as well as town hall staff, select board, school committee, and school superintendent and assistant superintendent, all of whom we met with some multiple times for their candor and patience answering our questions. As to the business at hand, the town of Wenham is in very strong financial condition. The rating agency Standard & Poor's assigns Wenham its highest rating of creditworthiness, AAA. The town's independent auditors, Powers and Sullivan, audited the town financial statements as of June 30, 2023, and again offered an unqualified opinion that the financial statements fairly present, in all material respects, the financial position of the town. The total operating budget for FY25, including town and school spending, is approximately $24.4 million, an increase of 5.45% or $1.3 million. The tax rate that dropped to $15.66 per thousand in FY24 from $17.35 on an increased assessed values is projected to increase to $16.49, which will result in roughly a $714 increase in real estate taxes for the median assessed valued home in Wenham of $860,000. Wenham faces the same inflationary pressures that you all do in your households, plus needing to offer market wages and benefits in order to attract and retain employees. The good news is that for the fourth year in a row, the town's operating budget, capital spending, and schools operating budget will be funded within the levy limit, meaning without the need for a Proposition 2.5 override. A few words about how the town raises revenue. Approximately 1.5% comes from state aid, 2% from businesses, 2.5% from water fees, and roughly 94% from residential real estate and excise taxes. While Proposition 2.5 limits the levy increase to 2.5%, the town may spend above the levy limit by voting at town meeting to exclude certain borrowing from the limit. This was done last year for the athletic field project, and the debt service associated with borrowed funds will add roughly $466,000 to excluded debt, beginning with the FY25 budget. Of the total FY25 budget, education represents roughly 53% of spending, and town operations 47%. Town spending is up 3.41%, and school spending is up 7.35%. Hamilton Wenham Regional School District spending is increasing 6.63% to Wenham, slightly less than Hamilton's increase because Wenham benefited from a shift in the 3-year rolling average school enrollment calculation that determines how we split the assessment of the school's costs and expenses. I think it's important to note that 60% of the increase of the school spending to Wenham is attributed to the field project debt service. Also worth noting, beginning in FY26, it is likely that Wenham's share of the assessment will increase due to our school enrollment growing the past couple of years relative to that of Hamilton. Essex Tech spending is up over 50%, or about $100,000, due to enrollment from Wenham increasing from 11 students to 16. Shifting to the town's operating expenses, town departments were again instructed by the Select Board and Town Administrator to submit level-funded budgets, meaning no increase in spending over FY24 other than contractually obligated increases, plus a short list of exceptions to the mandate of level funding considered necessary to maintain or enhance critical town services. A chart on pages 5 and 6 in the warrant illustrates the increases in spending by functional area, resulting in the 3.41% overall increase. Collectively, wages and benefits represents over 68% of town spending. Cost of living increases for non-union employees, employee labor contracts, and collective bargaining agreements with wage and step increases push wages up 5.78%, employee benefits being up 6%, and health insurance premiums rising 9% all contribute to the overall 3.41% increase. Other material drivers of the increase in town spending include in land use department, conversion of the part-time conservation open space coordinator position to a full-time role, to support, among other projects, work related to MBTA community zoning, the master plan, and of course, master plan implementation. Information technology, IT spending is up on conversion to the Office 365 product suite and annual service agreements associated with the new ClearGov budget software and Civic Plus website purchases that are proposed in Article 4. Town Hall, an additional $12,000 was budgeted this year for merit increases and contract negotiations if necessary. So that brings that number to $32,000 in total. And then town clerk. The office anticipates higher spending this year related to increased work in a presidential election year. and $12,500 was added for possible overlap of personnel transitioning from an elected to an appointed town clerk. A few words about free cash. First, I'd like to draw your attention to a change to some of the figures in Articles 4, 5, and 6. When the warrant was sent out to print, the Department of Revenue had not yet certified the town's free cash amount, so an estimate of $2.3 million was used for budgeting. The actual certified free cash amount came in at $2,526,303. The uses of free cash that are detailed in the articles are unchanged, so it's just the starting balance and the remaining that are changing. So remaining free cash will be $496,101. I'm sorry, $496,191, an increase of $226,303 over what is in the warrant, for a balance of roughly 2% of the operating budget, which provides a strong beginning balance for FY26. We had a number of discussions in FinCom about the term free cash. It is commonly used, but something of a misnomer because it isn't free or cash. It may be best described as funds that were raised through taxes the prior year, but not spent, plus revenue that the town received above what was budgeted for. Free cash is only free in the sense that it is available for appropriation at town meeting. And while $2.5 million may seem a bit high, we do expect free cash to decline in coming years. You'll notice a change this year in the presentation of the operating budget warrant article. In the past, proposed spending was only compared to prior year's approved spending. This year, the comparison includes actual spending, which we believe provides greater transparency and will lead to budgets in the future that track closer to actual spending. A budget that generates free cash, supports a strong credit rating, and contributes to the town's ability to manage through cycles. So you may expect budgets in the future to continue to generate free cash in the range of 4 to 6% of total operating budget. Since free cash is a non-recurring revenue source, its use is typically restricted to paying one-time expenditures, funding capital projects, or replenishing other reserves, as we are recommending in Articles 4, 5, and 6. Looking ahead, there are a number of negotiations and initiatives on the horizon likely to put upward pressure on town spending, with various options available to possibly help mitigate the costs associated with those projects. We encourage all Wenham residents to be actively engaged in these discussions by attending town board and committee meetings and sharing your thoughts with town leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Calder. Now I'll invite Superintendent Eric Tracy to make his presentation on the school district budget.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the opportunity to address the citizens of Wenham. I'd also like to thank the members of the school committee, the town administrator, members of the select and finance boards, and many others who have had a hand in working to present a fiscally responsible budget to you today. One final thank you goes out to Vinnie Leone, our Assistant Superintendent of Business and Finance, for his work since early November on the planning and development of the final budget. The overall increase in the in the gross operating costs of the school district this year is 1.13%. The school district and town boards have continued to improve transparency through joint meetings of boards and chairpersons so that everyone's needs are transparent and fully understood. That first slide, yep, thank you. There are several items to highlight within the FY25 budget that was approved by the school committee on February 8th, 2024. Once again, we've continued last year to wrestle with the difficulty of not being able to fill all of our positions. I'll jump over that first one. We did manage to reduce our FTEs, the number of people employed, by 6.48. It's important to note that the reductions impact the secondary level as our elementary grades have continued to increase to the second highest level in 11 years to 847 students pre-K to 5. This brings our total staffing reductions over the last 2 years to more than 17. We've once again returned $773,000 to the towns. This is the third year in a row. This budget allows for $494,622 to be moved to our stabilization fund. It also allows an additional $494,622 for other post-employment benefits, or OPEB. Next year, we're estimated to have over $3.2 million committed to a once-empty OPEB fund. The other things you can read on the screen behind me, big thing to note on the bottom, $1.5 million increase in the debt service due to the Athletics Facilities Improvement Project that was approved last year. Next slide, please. This slide is an overview of the operating budget and how we break down the major components. As mentioned earlier, last year we had another difficult year trying to fill positions, leaving us with approximately $2.3 million in excess and deficiency. We intend to deploy the funds in the ways that I've recently noted. Monies into the stabilization fund, into OPEB, finish our final phase of the electronic display in our classrooms, and capital repairs across the district, and again, the $773,000 back to the towns. Next slide, please. This is a more detailed look at the FY25 budget that includes debt service. Mr. Calder eloquently noted that the debt has increased this year mostly due to the athletic facilities project. We do have other debts that are listed on the handout that we had that we are continuing to pay. We use the total operating expenditures of $44.5 million and then add the debt service, which is slightly over $2 million. Then we subtract our offsets and any other revenues that give us the final total assessment for the towns of $37,256,724. Next slide, please. It's important to note that we have several debt obligations that have been part of the budget for many years, including things like the Bucher-Winthrop boiler and window replacements, the Cutler roof, and the Winthrop sprinkler system. For FY25, there's an additional $1.5 million increase in debt due to the first payment being due next year for the Athletic Facilities Improvement Project. Next slide, please. Since we're approved to open and fund a stabilization fund, we are also required to report annually on any changes to the fund. This slide notes that there has been no money expended from the fund to date, and we have gained interest in the amount of $27,933, bringing the total to $1.73 million. This can also be found in our district budget book, which is available on our website. Very exciting reading, 60 pages of every line in the school district budget and some great statistics. Next slide, please. This slide represents the budget as we report it to the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It shows a better breakdown of the gross increase of the district operating budget at 1.13%. It is also important to note that we started the budget process by examining the last 3 years of expenditures and reducing the areas where we consistently underspent. This has been a consistent issue over the last few years, so we went backwards and pulled every single line where there was excess monies and tried to figure out why or where it wasn't underspent, which is how we reduced our budget to 1.13% operating. Final slide. I want to thank you for entrusting me to represent the students, the families, the faculty, and the staff of Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District. We continue to work to improve our schools and our school facilities. As I have said in the past, I truly believe that our schools are the glue that binds our communities. We must continue to work together and commit to keeping our communities strong, up to date, and competitive in the future. Thank you for the opportunity to present the FY25 school budget today.
Thank you, Superintendent. If Jeff Calder of the FinCom wishes to make the main motion under Article 3, I will entertain the motion from your chair or from the podium, whichever you please. If you want to do it from the podium, go ahead, Jeff.
Move to raise and appropriate the total amount of $24,398,784 for the 12-month period beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025, including expenses for the town and regional school districts, all set forth in the document entitled FY 2025 budget.
Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. After Mr. Calder reviews the budget categories and amounts, we will consider any holds and take the vote. A vote on the motion requires a simple majority. Jeff, before I ask you to read through the budget, I do note that there is a voter card sitting on the floor in the middle. If someone dropped it, they might want to pick that up. Thank you. All right, Mr. Calder, will you please read through the budget?
Moderator, $50. Select Board, $20,048. Town Administrator, $160,508. Finance and Advisory, $250.
Jeff, can I just ask you to slow down just a little bit in case people want to shout out for holds? Thanks.
Reserve Fund, $125,000. Municipal Audit, $42,250. Assessors, $148,410. Tax title expense, $10,000. Finance Department, $382,549. Legal, $100,000. Information Technology, $167,587. Town Hall, $394,010. Town Clerk, $136,271. Land Use, $134,724. Buildings and Grounds, $188,681. Town Reports, $6,500. Iron Rail, $48,200. For a total general government amount of $2,065,038. Police Department, $1,862,987. Fire Department, $955,312. Permitting, $104,604. Tree Warden, $44,250. For a total budget for public safety of $2,967,153. Hamilton Wenham Regional School, $12,559,242. Essex North Shore Vocational, $290,011.
All right, that's a hold on 320 Essex North Shore Vocational. Continue, Mr. Calder.
Total education spending, $12,849,900. $253. Highway Department, $935,602. Snow and ice, $109,220. Street lighting, $18,000. Refuse collection, $514,582. Cemetery Department, $14,575. Total Public Works, $1,591,979. Next, Health Department, $41,856. Council on Aging, $148,170. Veterans Services, $26,222, for a total budget for Health and Human Services of $216,248. Library, $1,079,239. Joint Recreation, $107,710. Historic Commission, $200. Total Culture and Recreation, $1,187,149. Debt principal, $306,806. Debt interest, $40,950. For total debt service related to town spending of $347,756. Employee benefits, $2,289,168. General insurance, $202,230. Transfer to OPEB, $100,000.
That was a hold on 990, transfer to OPEB.
For total general fund budget of $23,815,974. Water Department, $582,810. Which brings us to the total FY25 budget of $24,398,784.
Thank you, Jeff. We've got two holds here in the gym. I do just want to pause and ask the assistant moderator in the multipurpose room whether there are any holds called in the multipurpose room. No holds, Mr. Anderson signals. So we've got 320 North Shore Vocational Tech, and we've got 990 transfer to OPEB. We will start with 320 North Shore, Essex North Shore Vocational. Would anyone like to speak on that line item?
Hi, Michelle Bailey, 2 Remington Road. My question is just there is approximately a $100,000 increase there. Is that an increase in tuition or an increase in students, or what is the cause of that increase? Because previous year's increases have not been that significant.
I believe Mr. Calder remarked on it during his report, but he can explain further in response to the question.
Yes, thank you for the question. That's primarily driven by the increase in students. The number of students from Wenham attending Essex Tech has increased from 11 to 16. So it's an increase of 5 students at roughly 20,000 per person is what the assessment is from Essex Tech.
Any other questions, comments, or other remarks on 320 Essex North Shore Vocational? All right, seeing none, we'll move to the other hold, which was item 990, transfer to OPEB.
Angus West, 7 Walnut Road, Wenham. I want to commend you first for having this in here to fund our unfunded pension and employee benefit liability. My question was, it said that you had sought the advice of consultants at what level was appropriate for the town. You said that you were going to take us to 15% on a $6 billion unfunded liability. Why so low? Is that the norm? And is it appropriate to have $6 billion of debt unfunded? And a corollary question, I didn't put a hold on the school budget, but I wondered if our finance committee has a full understanding of what the school budget's unfunded pension and retirement benefit liabilities are as an aggregate to the school district and to Wenham.
I'll direct that question to Mr. Calder in the first instance.
I would say that 15% is a path toward getting to a full funding of the OPEB liability. Yeah, we're making a significant increase toward that. We have the benefit of the free cash this year. That is not the end point, but we see that as a worthy increase toward our path of being fully funded for that liability. And then as far as the school's OPEB liability, I think Superintendent Tracy would be better advised to speak on that.
The moderator will recognize the
I'm sorry.
superintendent.
Please.
OPEB on the school size is approximately a $30 million liability. As you know, if you go back before I started my tenure 3 years ago, we had, I think, 50,000 maybe in there. So we really pushed to move the amount up. We are projected to be over $3.2 million towards that, which has already began to reduce our liability. That liability will continue to reduce. If you noticed on one of my slides, we had a $494,000, just an increase in that. There's also built into the budget our annual commitment to OPEB, which is $250,000. So this year alone, we're looking at just funding $750,000 into that, which helps us in the long run to fund these liabilities of basically of retirees.
Thank you, Superintendent Tracy. Any other questions, comments, remarks on item 990, transfer to OPEB? Seeing no one approaching the microphone and having dealt with all holds, we will now vote on the motion under Article 3. A yes vote means approving the budget. A no vote means opposing the budget. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority, and I will now open the voting. Again, 1 for yes, 2 for no. I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the vote. And I declare the motion passes 128 to 13. On to Article 4, use of free cash and other available funds to fund fiscal year 2025 capital improvement program. Article 4 seeks authorization for the town to use free cash and other funds, as noted, to fund the capital improvement projects set forth in the list in the warrant. If Scott Schoenberger of the FinCom wishes to make the main motion under Article 4, I will entertain the motion.
Move to approve Article 4 for the purposes and in the amounts as printed in the warrant, with $794,540 to be funded from free cash.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. And now Scott Schoenberger will review the capital items and amounts. If you wish to address any of these items separately, please say hold, just like we did before in the budget article. After Mr. Schoenberger completes the review of the capital items, we will consider any holds and take the vote. Mr. Schoenberger, would you please read through the capital items?
Council on Aging, Senior Center First Floor Rug Replacement, $10,000. DPW, one-ton dump replacement, 2002 Chevy dump, $115,000. DPW, 2021 trackless equipment lease payment, $31,000. DPW Road Capital Supplemental Chapter 90 funds for paving projects and to cover winter damage in spring, $50,000. DPW Fuel Station Tracking Software, $25,000. Fire Department Communication Radios, $229,000.
Hold on the communication radios. Please continue, Mr. Schoenberger.
Fire Department Replace Turnout Gear, $35,000. Fire Department SCBA Bottles, $22,290. Information Technology Budgeting Software, $25,000. Information Technology New Town Website Migration and Setup, $35,000. Joint Recreation HVAC Replacement, $87,000. Library Paint Exterior, $26,700. Police Department 2023 Durango and Equipment Unmarked, $60,200. Police Department 2023 Durango and Equipment and Markings, $69,250. Capital Projects, $820,440, less unused prior year capital appropriations of $25,900. Free cash use total, $794,540.
All right, we had a hold on the fire department communication radios. Would anyone like to speak on that hold?
My name is Ken Whitaker. I live at 70 on Road. I'm curious, and I'm wondering if somebody can explain to me, in this age of nearly instant global communication, why Wenham is spending almost $250,000 on radios.
Gonna ask whether Chief Kavanaugh would like to address the question in the first instance.
Good afternoon. To answer your question, with all the technology, this is how every department basically in the state runs, with portables, with mobiles, and it's, unfortunately, this is the grant that we did not get last year, and it's 228, but we're splitting it with the police with 114,000 each. And this is the way they do it with the radio, so it's all, every firefighter gets a portable, every vehicle gets a mobile unit, and that's just how it is, how they do it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Chief. Chief DiNapoli, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to echo Chief Kavanaugh's points, it's kind of a crossover need as well. It follows into our emergency management operations, the interoperability between police and fire. There are also, unfortunately, a lot of dead spots in town, which is certainly not only an officer safety issue for our officers if they're in certain parts of town, and there's an issue with not being able to reach our dispatch center, or back and forth between police and fire. There continues to be issues. It obviously is a big money item. We're candidly aware of that. Chief Kavanaugh spoke to the grant that was attempted last year that didn't work out. But this definitely is a need, not just a want. Can't put a price tag on officer safety or being able to reach our police and fire in all areas of town. So if I could say anything out of what's brought up here today, is that it's a necessity. It's not just a luxury that we're asking for this as a joint request. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief DiNapoli. I wonder if anyone would like to make a motion to amend the motion to reflect that it is fire and police department for the communication radios.
I think Steve wants to talk. Good.
Would anyone like to make that motion? All you have to say is so moved. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. Unless anyone else would like to speak on the hold for the communication radios, we'll proceed to vote. Technically, we have to vote on the motion to amend. I'm going to take this one by a show of hands. All those in favor of the amendment to reflect that it's fire and police, raise your cards. All right, thank you. Anyone opposed to the amendment to reflect that it's fire and police? All right, that's a unanimous amendment. All right. Now, having dealt with the hold and the amendment, we will vote on the motion under Article 4 as amended. A yes vote means approving these capital items from the free cash and other appropriations noted. A no vote means not funding them. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. I'm going to go ahead, again, 1 for yes, 2 for no. Go ahead and open the voting. Give it a couple more seconds. So if you haven't voted yet and want to, get that vote in. 5 more seconds. And we're going to close the vote. And the motion passes 134 to 5. All right, on to Article 5, Funding of Stabilization Fund. If Dan Ojikonovich of the FinCom wishes to make the main motion under Article 5, I will entertain the motion.
Move to approve Article 5 as printed in the warrant.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? All right. Seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on the motion under Article 5. A yes vote means putting the money in the stabilization fund. A no vote means doing nothing. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. I'm going to go ahead and open the voting. Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. Motion passes 134 to 6. Article 6, funding of the OPEB Trust Fund. If Phineas Sprague of the FinCom wishes to make the main motion under Article 6, I will entertain the motion. I'm sorry, was that moved to approve? Okay, thank you, Phineas. And is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? Seeing no one approach the microphones, we'll now vote on the motion under Article 6. A yes vote means approving the transfer of free cash to the OPEB trust fund. A no vote means opposing the transfer. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. We'll open the voting. Go ahead. And we'll give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion carries 133 to 6. All right. Now, before I entertain a motion under Article 7, it is the moderator's impression that we may be able to expedite consideration of Articles 7 through 11. They are routine articles appearing each year and about which there is generally little or no debate. Therefore, I will ask the meeting whether it would like to take all such articles together as a consent calendar. For each article, I will read the article number and general purpose. If you want to consider that article separately for any reason, please say hold after I read the article. In this case, if 5 voters rise in support of the hold, then we will pull the article out of the consent calendar. We will then vote on the articles remaining in the consent calendar as a batch, and then turn back to any separately held articles for separate consideration and voting if applicable. So, the 5 articles proposed as a consent calendar are Article 7, Payment of Prior Year's Bills. Article 8, Acceptance of Cemetery and Other Trust Funds received in fiscal year 2023. Article 9, a transfer of $6,000 from the Cemetery Sale of Lots Fund to the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund for costs related to the maintenance of the town's cemeteries. Article 10, a transfer of $35,000 from the water operating budget to the Water Capital Reserve Fund for future infrastructure replacements. And Article 11, acceptance of Chapter 90 funds and authorization for the town to undertake major road projects qualifying for such funding. All right, hearing no holds, I will now recognize Scott Schoenberger of the FinCom to make the main motion under the consent calendar, which consists of Articles 7 through 11.
Move that Articles 7 through 11 be approved as printed in the warrant.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. We will now vote on the motion to approve the consent calendar consisting of Articles 7 through 11. A yes vote means approving all action in these articles. A no vote means opposing such action. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. I'm going to go ahead and open up the vote. Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. And we'll give it about 5 more seconds before we close the vote. All right, we'll close the vote. The motion carries 138 to 1. All right, skipping ahead now, we pass through Articles 7 through 11 on the consent, so we are at Article 12, Water Software Purchase. If Phineas Sprague of the FinCom wishes to make the main motion under Article 12, I will entertain the motion. Thank you. Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? All right, seeing no one approach the microphones, we'll now vote on the motion under Article 12. A vote on this requires a simple majority. A yes vote is to appropriate the money and approve the article. A no vote is to not do so. We'll open the voting. All right, 5 seconds and we'll close it. All right, going to close the vote. The motion carries unanimously, 134 to 0. On to Article 13, CPA reservations and appropriations. Article 13 proposes appropriation of the Community Preservation Act budget for the upcoming fiscal year, including reservations for each of the three purposes of the act. Open space, which includes land for recreational use, historic resources, and community housing, as well as for the debt service and administration expenses of the Community Preservation Committee. This year, the Community Preservation Committee has also recommended appropriations from the Community Preservation Fund for projects as set forth in the warrant book. By way of background, the town adopted the Community Preservation Act in 2005. The town assesses a 3% surcharge on the tax levy on real property for community preservation purposes, and also receives state matching funds. Each year, the Community Preservation Committee evaluates the town's community preservation needs. A recommendation from the Community Preservation Committee is required for the appropriation of CPA funds. I will now ask Rick Woodland, the chair of the CPC, to present the CPC's annual report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moderator, Select Board members, Finance Committee members, invited guests, town meeting members. First off, I'd like to recognize the passing last year of Harriet Davis, who was a driving force behind the creation of the CPA in Wenham. Thank you, Ms. Davis. As chairperson of the Community Preservation Committee, I'd like to take a minute to explain our process this year and to introduce the 2025 grant motions for your approval. Our season began in September when preliminary grant applications were solicited from the town and Wenham-based organizations. It moved on to full applications being submitted in December, and then CPA review, which took us through January and February. Our recommendations were presented to the keepers of the warrant for inclusion, and we now are here requesting the town's consent, your consent, to move these requests forward to the Select Board to enter into agreements with the town departments and local organizations to bring their projects to life. Before we get into Article 13, I'd like to take a moment to thank my fellow committee members for their public service this season. If you are here, please stand as you are comfortable. Janet Burt, Vice Chair, Leo Mastronzi, Alden Drake, Trudy Reed, Bonnie Anderson, Patricia Gruitz, and Catherine Harrison. I would like to also thank our administrative support person, Joe Pessamato. Great job. Thank you. And Steve Poulos, and the other administration people who have helped us immensely this season. Now on to the motions.
Thank you, Mr. Woodland. So just a note, Mr. Woodland will now read the 9 CPC motions. We will debate and vote on each of them separately. I do want to note that the Community Preservation Committee has voted to recommend approval of all of the motions under the article. Is that correct, Mr. Woodland?
That is correct.
All right, please proceed with the motions.
Motion 1. I move, pursuant to the requirements of the Community Preservation Act, to appropriate the sums listed in the chart printed in the warrant under Article 13, entitled Administrative Expenses and Reservations, in the amounts for the purposes from the funding sources specified.
Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion?
Jennifer Carr, 5 Meridian Road. I noticed that there were several properties that the CPC was asking for funds to purchase. Can I ask what is the plan for those 3 properties?
So that issue will be addressed in subsequent motions. This motion is just the administrative appropriation, which is how the CPC money gets into the CPC fund for future use. Right, Rick?
Correct, Mr. Moderator.
Great. Okay. Anyone want to speak further on motion 1?
Jared Ward, 24 Mayflower. I don't understand it says 502,000 budgetary reserve. I don't understand what that is.
Mr. Woodland, do you have an answer?
One moment, please. Number again, please?
Okay, on page 32, 502,000 budgetary reserve.
Again, that is for one of the subsequent motions. That relates to one of the projects that the CPC is proposing. We'll get there in about 3 or 4 motions.
Oh, I'm sorry, now I'm thoroughly confused. What are we voting on?
We're just voting at this moment, Mr. Moderator, Mayor, we are just voting for putting the funds that we've raised into the appropriate buckets.
So if you look at the warrant book, there's a couple of charts. The first one that is titled Administrative Expenses and Reservations and totals $696,310. That's the money going in, and that is what the current motion is acting on.
Okay, I'm still confused. So if we put $1.5 million, what bucket are we putting it into by this vote?
So that's the second chart. That's the money that is going out. In the subsequent motions, we will address each of those projects.
Oh, okay. He explained it. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. All right.
So thank you.
And yes, Mr. Waddell.
Hello, Patrick Waddell, 5 Great Pond Road. What I'd like to hear is how much money that we took in from local receipts and how much we received in state match.
The state match this year is approximately 20% of what our tax revenue is. And of that, our take in here is $696,310. So that's the 3%. And the state this year only matched about 20%. If you heard Senator Tarr earlier today saying everything's being cut back and things are being reduced, one place that was hit pretty hard is contributory funding to CPCs across the state.
Anyone else on the first CPC motion, which again is just to put the money into the CPC fund for use down the line? All right. Seeing no one else address the microphone for that motion, we will now vote on motion 1 under Article 13. So a yes vote authorizes the CPA funds going into the administrative expenses and reservations. A no vote opposes that. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. Voting is now open. We'll close the voting in about 5 seconds. Go ahead and close the vote. The motion passes 130 to 8. All right, continue, Mr. Woodland. And just so everyone's clear, we will now get into the motions one by one for each of the projects set forth in the warrant book.
Thank you. Motion 2. Great. I move to appropriate the total sum of $17,000 from the Community Preservation Fund Historic Preservation Reserve for the purposes of restoration and repair of the Main Street Cemetery granite wall as described more fully in the Cemeteries Commission's application to the Community Preservation Committee, and further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into a memorandum of agreement with the Cemetery Commission as necessary or desirable on such terms and condition as the Select Board deems appropriate, as long as the Select Board keeps the CPC apprised of their progress.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on this motion? All right, seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on motion number 2 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the use of the funds for the restoration and repair of the Main Street Cemetery granite wall. A no vote opposes that use. A vote on this motion requires majority vote, and the voting is now open. All right, we'll close the voting in about 5 seconds. And close the vote. The motion passes 136 to 3. Mr. Woodland, please continue.
Motion 3. I move to appropriate the total sum of $54,000 from the Community Preservation Fund Open Space and Recreation Reserve for the purposes of the rehabilitation of the Karen Wolf Memorial Garden at Bucher School and as described more fully in the Planning Department's application to the Community Preservation Committee, and further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into a memorandum of agreement with the Planning Department as may be necessary or desirable on such terms and conditions as the Select Board deems appropriate, as long as the Select Board keeps the Community Preservation Commission apprised of their progress.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on this motion? All right, seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on motion 3 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the use of the funds for the rehabilitation of the Karen Wolf Memorial Garden. A no vote opposes that use. A vote on this motion requires a majority vote. Voting is now open. And we'll give it about 5 more seconds. And we'll go ahead and close the vote. The motion passes 106 to 34. Mr. Woodland, please proceed.
Motion 4, I move to appropriate the total sum of $109,600 with $52,631 coming from the Community Preservation Fund Historic Preservation Reserve and $56,969 coming from the Community Preservation's fiscal year 2025 budgetary reserve for the payment of debt service for Town Hall renovation project, and as described more fully in the town's application to the Community Preservation Committee.
Thank you. Is there a second on the motion? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion?
Mr. Moderator, I just want to add a little detail to this.
Please.
That since the town hall, I'm a very big supporter of the town hall renovation. I think we all are so happy for it. So far to date, we've approved $1.9 million to satisfy the bond requirements there, and the state matching helped reduce our actual total input. So the state's helping funding this debt back to make town hall happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. All right. Unless there's any other comments or questions or remarks on motion 4, we'll proceed to vote on motion 4 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the use of the funds for payment of the debt service on the Town Hall renovation project. A no vote opposes that use. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority vote. Voting is now open. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 133 to 5. Mr. Woodland, please proceed.
Motion 5, I move to appropriate the total sum of $30,000 from the Community Preservation Fund fiscal year 24 budgetary reserve as a grant to the Wenham Museum for the purposes of preserving and sharing archival resources to honor Wenham's story, putting Wenham's historical documents online, and as described more fully in its application to the Community Preservation Committee. And further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into a grant agreement with the Wenham Museum on such terms and conditions as the Select Board deems appropriate, as long as the Select Board keeps the CPC, Community Preservation Committee, apprised of their progress.
Is there a second? Motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? Seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on motion 5 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the use of funds for the Wenham Museum's archive project. A no vote opposes that use. A vote on this motion requires a majority, and voting is now open. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion carries 125 to 13. Mr. Woodland, please proceed.
Motion 6, I move to take items 5 and 6 together and to appropriate to the Conservation Fund created by the provisions of General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C, and under the authority of the Conservation Commission, the total sum of $1,737,500, with $998,000 coming from the Community Preservation Fund Open Space and Recreation Reserve, $615,500 coming from the Community Preservation Fiscal Year '24 Budgetary Reserve, and $124,000 coming from the Community Preservation Fiscal Year '25 Budgetary Reserve for land acquisition of one or more of the following parcels, all identified as priorities in the town's Open Space and Recreation Committee's master plan. 9 Maple Street, 212 Topsfield Road, and/or 74 Cherry Street, including related fees and expenses, and as described more fully in its application to the Community Preservation Committee, and further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into an memorandum of agreement as may be necessary or desirable on such terms and conditions as the Board deems appropriate, and further, that such funds be invested by the town treasurer to maximize their value consistent with Massachusetts general law.
Is there a second? All right, the motion has been made and seconded. Before we take any comments, I just want to make clear exactly what we're doing. The motion proposes action on 2 parts of the chart in the warrant article. The first one being the total grant amount of $1.5 million, and then the next one being the $237,500. So those 2 items are being taken together under this single motion. Just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. Mr. Waddell, you were first to the microphone. I'll go ahead and recognize you first.
Thank you. Patrick Waddell, 5 Great Pond Road. Could members of the CPC and the Select Board please state whether or not they are conflicted on this vote as an abutter to any of these properties, please?
Yes, I have recused myself from that. Our votes were taken when I realized that I personally wasn't a butter. We reopened discussion. We canceled the votes. We reopened discussion. I was not present at that meeting, and the group continued their discussion.
But I think there are many more members of both the Select Board and the CPC that are conflicted, and I believe there's an agreement with Town Council and to cover any legal costs that may arise from this action of conflicted members voting. Can you address that, please?
I can only speak to my conflict. If there are other people who are in conflict, then they probably should speak on their own behalf. We went through a legal process with council to make sure that we were as transparent as possible in this process, and the appropriate forms were filed to the approval of the town. Other people that may be in conflict?
And I will recognize Town Council if Town Council wants to address the issue as well.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lauren Goldberg, KP Law. There is no agreement as such. There was discussion about potential conflicts. Potential conflicts of interest belong to the individuals themselves and are not actionable by the committee itself.
Thank you. All right, up here in the front, we'll go front, and then we'll go back to the back microphone.
I'd just like to...
Name and address again, please.
Jennifer Carr, 5 Meridian Road. I would also just like, I actually have 2 questions. I'd like to repeat my previous question as to what the plan is for these properties, if they're going to remain vacant or they're going to be developed in some way. And I would ask that the FinCom address the loss of tax revenue from these properties and how we are going to make up those tax revenues.
So, Mr. Woodland, if you want to address the first question, I'll hear you on the first question, and then
Could you repeat the question? Was
I believe the question was: is there a plan for the use of any of these 3 properties after the acquisition that's proposed?
That would be beyond the scope of the CPC. We were just acting on their request to fund the conservation fund to actually acquire these properties for permanent conservation. Several of them are already under conservation restrictions under agricultural law, which allows them certain tax benefits. But if there's somebody from the Conservation Commission who would like to speak as to specifically what their thoughts were behind that, I think there's a gentleman in the back that could do that for us.
Before we hear anyone else, the town council would like to address the issue.
Mr. Moderator, through you, what's being recommended is that money be placed into the Conservation Fund for expenditure for acquisition of the 3 properties. Money in the Conservation Fund can only be spent consistent with state law for conservation purposes. Any land that's acquired under this authorization would be subject to a conservation restriction and protected under Article 97 by law from development.
Thank you.
And would anyone from the FinCom like to address the question regarding tax implications, if they have anything to add?
Sure, this is Jeff Calder. I would add, if a property is removed from the properties that are assessed and part of the tax levy, that as with any other expenditures that the town is making in the future, the town's budget would need to work within the revenues that we are able to raise through the tax levy and adjust accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Calder. Now to the back microphone, go ahead and again state your name and address.
Jared Ward, 24 Mayflower. First of all, what is a top-ranked parcel matrix? We were all given this green flyer, saying we have to acquire this property immediately. I assume that relates to this line item. Could somebody address what a top-rank parcel matrix is? And since we haven't completed, the plan of the town yet, I fail to understand what the opinion of the Open Space and Recreation Committee, why we should be even addressing that as a matter of concern. So that's my first question.
Could you state all your questions? I just want to make sure we don't run over
The
time.
second question is, assuming that this slush fund is approved, what happens if a period of negotiation is entered into and the town fails to acquire these properties? Have we permanently allocated a slush fund to CONSCOM?
Again, I'll reiterate town council's remark that the Conservation Fund is a fund governed by state law. But with respect to the first question in the handout, Mr. Woodland, do you have anything you'd like to add on that?
Yes, we have Mr. Phil is here from the Conservation Commission. He's next in line to speak. They've gone through their master plan process, and I think he might be able to address a couple of the concerns that have come up so far.
All right, then I'll recognize, again, I apologize, Mr. Colarusso, is it?
Yes.
I'll recognize Mr. Colarusso next.
Phil Colarusso, 14 Juniper Street, Chairman of the Wenham Concom, also a member of the Master Plan Committee. I didn't realize it'd be so popular here today. So part of the master planning process, people identified the desire to keep Wenham being the bucolic rural community that it is. And they also identified that the taxes were too high. Now, this request, all we're asking for is a transfer of funds. It doesn't necessarily automatically mean that we're going to purchase these properties. They've been identified as properties of high priority by a separate committee. And it would give us the ability to be nimble to actually make the purchase if the community so wants us to do that. For people who've been around a little while, you may remember the Flynn Golf Course went up for purchase. And the town had the right, because it was a Chapter 61 property, to make the purchase and do with it what they would like to do. We did not make that purchase, even though the community voted in a straw poll with the selectmen to actually make the purchase. The selectmen voted against it, and it went to development. Now, these properties that have been identified are large properties that could easily be subdivided. If you're worried about taxes, subdivisions of single-family homes will cause your tax bills to go up. Services will outweigh the amount of tax revenue generated. So this is an approach to, one, maintain the rural community that we have, while also preventing taxes from going up through additional subdivision development. I encourage you all to read the master plan and the Cambridge Econometrics report, which goes into great detail about the finances of this town and development opportunities and what they may or may not mean to your tax bill. We're not in a good position here to develop our way out of our higher taxes, but we are in a good position to maintain the nature of this community if we so desire.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Calvaruso. Now, there was also a question that Mr. Ward advanced regarding what happens to money in the conservation fund that's not spent. Town Council, would you care to address that?
Yes, surely. Through you, Mr. Moderator. The money in the conservation fund, if it is not, that you're talking about appropriating right now, if it's not used for the acquisition of 1 or 2 or 3 of those pieces of land, that money remains in that fund. It cannot be spent for any other purpose.
Thank you. In the back, yes, go ahead.
I'm Matt DiGiuseppe, 38 Maple Street. I'm curious because the requested appropriation is less than a fraction of the assessed value of the Maple and Cherry Street property. Is there even a possibility of using this money for this acquisition, or would we need to acquire it for below market rate?
From the advice I have from the Conservation Commission, if they'd like to come forward and give their own remarks, yes.
So obviously,
I'll recognize Mr. Calvaruso. Go ahead.
Obviously, 1.7 million is not going to be enough to, on its own, to purchase any of these properties. But we intend to work with Essex Greenbelt and other entities to complete a purchase.
I think we're getting some, I don't know if the microphone back there is breaking in and out. Just keep an eye on that, but if that continues to happen, then I just ask people to come to the front microphone. All right.
Apologies, am I still recognized?
Yes, you still have more time. I'll recognize you further.
I'm just curious if we're...
You do need to restate your name, though.
Matt DiGiuseppe, 38 Maple Street.
Thank you.
I think in the green sheet it said we needed to purchase these properties promptly, but so have we identified further funding sources, or is this... I'm just trying to understand the realistic possibility of using these funds.
I'll recognize Mr. Calvaruso.
Yes, so Essex Greenbelt has approached some of these property owners, independent of the town, to purchase them. And again, we would work with any other entity that is willing to contribute to the end of, purchasing these properties to preserve open space.
Thank you, Mr. Calvaruso. Town Council also advises me that the money in the Conservation Fund can also be used for purchasing conservation restriction on these properties to prevent development. So it's not necessarily acquisition. If acquisition isn't possible, then it can also be used to negotiate and purchase conservation restrictions. Ms. Bailey, I believe you were next, and then we'll get to you, Mr. Whitaker. Again, state name and address, please.
Yeah. Michelle Bailey, 2 Remington Road. So I guess I am uncomfortable with voting to purchase land, and then should we not purchase the land or the conservation restriction, that money just can never be spent. So if we can have that clarification from our legal department. My second comment would be 74 Cherry Street currently has a sign out in front which says sale pending, so I think I would like to remove that with the statement that I might be an across the street butter. I think many people are abutters of these lands but may not know it. And I also, I guess if we were moving forward, I'd like the opportunity to be recognized again for an amendment.
I think if you're going to make an amendment, Ms. Bailey, your time is now. We don't generally recognize the same person on the same motion multiple times.
Okay.
Okay. Yep, Town Council.
We had a question.
Mr. Moderator, through you. The money in the conservation fund that you are talking, or the money that you're talking about putting in the conservation fund, it can only be spent for the purposes that are identified by town meeting. If the properties can't be purchased and a later town meeting wishes, it could move that money to a different location with the recommendation of the town meeting.
So in other words, the money can be, at a future town meeting, can be retrieved from the conservation fund and put to other use?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Whitaker.
Ken Whitaker, 7 Enon Road. I'm a longstanding member of the Conservation Commission and been personally involved in the preservation of several parcels of land here, both in Hamilton and Wenham. I also understand that the money that's being transferred has been set aside and accumulating all of these years, and no purchases have been made in the 10 or 13 years or however many years it has been accumulating there. So this is a transfer to a body that understands the environment here and is dedicated to preserving it, so it's in the right place. This is the tip of the spear here. We need to preserve land. I can assure you that developers are out there just waiting to pounce. You look at things going on now, you look at the proposal for 7 buildings with 35 condo units over near Gordon. We need to start building up our resources here to protect these valuable pieces of property. This is the first step in doing this. This is critically important that we gather our arms and get ready, because this is going to happen a lot. Please give the conservation the opportunity to begin attacking this problem, because it will be a problem in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Moderator, may I make a comment from the committee?
Why don't we, yes, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
We looked at this pretty carefully in our group, and I also spoke to the Community Preservation Alliance, who is kind of the CPA watchdog and helpful people. And Wenham's a little unusual. Most communities fund their conservation fund regularly with money that comes from the CPA. We've chosen to reserve those monies in the CPA budget and not disperse them directly to Conservation Commission or other preservation commissions. So if we look at what we spent on other buckets, we're essentially just truing up what we've spent in other areas like historic preservation, like recreation, and other spaces that we're going to bring them in line with what the town has expended on other projects. So I don't believe it's something that's out of line. We spent a lot of time discussing this and how we could do this, and we did spend time reaching out to other communities and how they fund it and what they've done in the past.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Woodland. Mr. Jukanovic?
Hi, I'm Deano Jukanovic, 36 Topsfield Road. I just wanted to comment on a previous comment that I think people could have interpreted to mean that all residential development is counterproductive to our kind of economic situation.
I'll remind the crowd that we do not really appreciate clapping during debate. Thank you. Continue, Mr.
I just want to
Jukanovic.
say it's a complex calculus to try to figure out how to maximize services and minimize taxes. I just don't want people to leave with a kind of simple soundbite that says all residential development is counterproductive to our fiscal goals.
I think Mr. Waddell was next, and then Ms. Evans.
Thank you. Patrick Waddell, 5 Great Pond Road. Just so everyone knows, this money is already here, and it's already reserved, and $998,000 is already set aside for open space for this purpose. You are the authorizing body, town meeting. If we do this transfer, number one, we're going to take $739,000 additional that is not reserved for specifically open space, affordable housing, recreation, and historic preservation. We can use that $739,000 for any of those. So we're taking that additional $739 and making it more restrictive. We're taking the $998,000 and making it more restrictive, and also removing your authorization of these funds. You have the power right now. If we do this, it would then become the Concom that is appointed, not elected, to authorize the use of these funds. Now, we're being asked to trust the Concom. I trust ourselves. I trust town meeting. And we do have the mechanism to call a special town meeting. If one of these properties comes up for sale and we are able to buy it, we can call a special town meeting. We have 120 days to exercise our right of first refusal on Chapter 61A and B properties. We don't need to transfer these funds. We can sit where they are and have the same use. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Evans?
Deb Evans, 12 Porter Street in Wenham, obviously. Rick, I have a question for you or for the committee. Originally, these were put into two different line items. Why weren't they combined at the outset?
We went through, there was another request from the town to approve a bond without knowing a property and without knowing an amount, and we didn't feel comfortable representing that to the town. So there were two land acquisition requests. One was a direct grant, one was a bond. And when we went through this, we felt that the bond request was too nebulous for us, that we didn't think without a named property, which you can't do at this point, without an amount. So we decided to devote more money to the Conservation Commission to have them more flexibility to spend on a down payment or on negotiation, as opposed to the bond, the bond request. Does that make sense? That's how we came about. Is anybody in the committee confirm that?
Not sure I fully understand, but I do fully trust you, so that's great. So two other things. One is I can confirm that 74 Cherry Street is selling privately, so I don't know if the town had a right to go before that sold privately, but it is being sold privately as we speak. It is still pending.
I can address that.
Okay.
We didn't have time to amend that. At the time that we did our work, you'll notice that it was on the market and it was not selling. So we felt that it was a valid property to include. Times have changed since then. It did go under agreement. Okay. So if somebody wants to make an amendment, I don't know, to take that property off there since it's been sold or it's close to being sold, I think that the town would entertain that.
No, I'm just interested in the said list of possible parcels. If that were on the list, which is why it's on here, and the property were for sale, or you knew it was going to be for sale, did the town not approach those owners?
I do not know that answer.
Okay.
I do not know that.
It's,
That's out of my purview.
It's probably not relevant, which is fine, but just too quickly, somebody asked about tax implications of conserving said land. The Streeter property at 9 Maple Street, I believe, contributes about $111,000 to our tax rolls. The property at 212 Topsfield Road is only 3 acres, so I'm not really understanding that at all, but that's $15,808 per year. And then the property at 74 Cherry Street contributes $87,880 per year for taxes. So those, if you're using those as an example, it's substantial. It's $215,000. And I do feel like we need to be mindful of one of the biggest things we heard on the master planning committee was, in fact, the burden of our taxes. So I think as we pull things off the tax rolls, even for the right reason, we need to understand where we're going to backfill that from.
Thank you.
Finally, I also sat on the master planning committee, and I agree with Dano. I don't really feel like there was any conclusive evidence or suggestion. You can draw your own conclusions when you look at the Cambridge Econometrics report. But it's not just commercial, it is some residential development that makes communities healthy and whole. So the fact that that would be, it's not either or. I don't think conclusively it was said that, you know, everything should be conserved that has to be conserved if we're going to remain fiscally healthy.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir. Please state your name and address.
Jeff Ham, 20 Edel Ave. I'm also the vice chair of the Conservation Commission. I wanted to address the issue whereby not transferring these funds, the gentleman spoke not too long ago about the ability of calling a meeting and having it appropriated at that time. That's one of the reasons why we want to be able to acquire this source of revenue so that we can act quickly, trying to get together a special meeting and be able to do it in a timely fashion within that 120-day period can be restrictive, and we're asking the town to be able to allow us the authority to do that now, today, so that we don't have to wait that period of time where the town can put in a bid for these properties should they come up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, state your name and address.
David Doggett, 5 William Fairfield Drive. It'd be helpful, maybe from someone from the Conservation Committee could explain if there are existing conservation restrictions on these properties, what is the benefit of the actual purchases? How long-standing are the restrictions? Would they hold over in the transfer of property if this doesn't happen, if it's a private market sale? Understanding that, basically the benefit of purchasing versus leaving the restrictions as is. How materially would that change the overall, properties at hand?
Would anyone like to address the question? Steve, do you have any information on the status of any restrictions on these properties as is?
I think also Phil has come to the microphone from the Conservation Commission.
Yeah,
Mr. Calruso, do you have information?
Well, just general. So one, the Conservation Commission didn't pick these 3 properties. The Open Space Committee did. So I don't know what, if they're Chapter 61 properties, they can come out of those restrictions prior to sale. And so then whatever restrictions are on them at that point could be changed. So I'm not familiar with with the specific restrictions on these 3 particular properties. Obviously, if we could enter into an agreement of a conservation restriction with the Conservation Commission and the town, as opposed to purchasing them, we would be happy to do that. But it's like making a trade. It takes 2 partners.
Town council advises me that these properties are not conservation restricted. Okay. In the front, Mr. Waddell, you've already spoken on this motion. I see you standing there. I anticipate you have a motion you want to offer. Is that the case?
No, I just was raised a question of if we're...
Okay, just hold on a second, Pat. Mr. Waddell, having already spoken once, I'm going to ask the sense of the meeting, do we want to let Mr. Waddell speak a second time on this motion, even though typically we only let a person speak once on a motion? Cards, we'll use cards just to get a sense of the meeting. All those in favor of letting Mr. Waddell speak further? Thank you. Anyone opposed to letting Mr. Waddell speak further? The ayes have it. Mr. Waddell, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, town meeting. Patrick Waddell, 5 Great Pond Road. It has just come to my attention that this property 74 Cherry Street is under agreement, which triggers our right of first refusal because I was on the Open Space and Rec Committee and I have their map, and it appears that is under Chapter 61A, which we should be triggering our right of first refusal anyway. And as the Conservation Commission member spoke, yes, Concom could move more quickly, but the will of town meeting would not be known, and the will of town meeting, whether we want to put an agricultural restriction on a property, they don't have to come back to us and ask for that. We can determine that in town meeting. The Concom is not held to those same, they can make the decisions instead of you making those decisions. Thank you.
And I believe the town administrator has something to add on the question of the right of first refusal. You got to push the button, Steve.
Right of first refusal is only triggered if there's a change of use. So if somebody's going to purchase the property and maintain the chapter land status, then there is no right of first refusal.
Okay. Go ahead. In the front, please. Name and address, if you don't mind.
Virginia Rogers, 6 William Fairfield Drive. I'm a little concerned about not setting aside some money for the purchase of conservation land, because the CPA has a category that is not only for conservation but for recreation. And I think the sense of me as a taxpayer and as a former member of the CPA is that we have done very little in the conservation of open space, particularly compared to what has been put towards recreation. And I think that if we earmark this specifically for conservation by giving the decision, then we might be able to approach that a little better balance.
Mr. Moderator, may I address that question?
You may. Go ahead, Mr. Woodland.
Working with the Town Finance Department, I have a few numbers to share with you to kind of back up Virginia's comments. To date, we've worked on 60 projects through the CPA. Recreation has been afforded $1.864 million, housing $2.063 million, historic, which includes the payback of the debt on the town hall, $2.549 million, and open space, $423,000. So just to show, to back up what you said, we spent very little on conserving open space, where we've been pretty robust with other areas of spending. So this is, in essence, just to catch up as well. Thank you.
Ms. Bailey, I know you're standing a couple feet back from the microphone. Are you requesting leave to address the meeting again? All right, as with Mr. Waddell, you've already spoken on this motion, so we'll do the same thing we did with Mr. Waddell. All those in favor of letting Ms. Bailey speak again, raise your cards for aye. All right, anyone opposed, raise your cards. The ayes have it. Go ahead, Ms. Bailey.
I move that we amend, both articles or the combined articles to remove 74 Cherry Street.
All right, Ms. Bailey, would you mind coming up and filling out a motion to amend form?
I will, as long as it is correctly recorded in the minutes.
The form will be part of the record.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a brief 5-minute recess to let Ms. Bailey fill out the motion that she's presenting. Feel free to get up, stretch your legs, use the bathroom.
Do you guys have extra water?
Yes, you want to allow that. Oh, so you can see, I see what you're saying. Gotcha.
This is 13-6.
It's not.
It's a single motion. It's a single motion. Yeah, it's a single motion.
Apparently, geez. This is one of those things about, like, almost how it's presented versus what it actually, because what it actually does is put the town in a power position. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's an excellent of all the people that have that position. Because he's such a big fan of this. Well, anyhow, obviously a huge issue here. It's just, in reality, it's either, yeah, we're good at it, or no, we're not. And no, we're not, and he's paying money to come back for a special time. Or not at all.
Can we switch to the still image?
Yeah. Yep. It's funny, too, the way it's characterized, because saying, like, we're taking power away from the community, no. The community's saying today, if those community parcels become available, we want them. That's the same decision. Yeah. That's right. Well, they've been in the motion though. I mean, they've been on the table since the applications were submitted. And the CPC met a bunch of times, so it's not really. Yeah, sure. Yeah. But that's this whole, like, where's the responsibility of the voters and versus the responsibility of the town.
I have to press the button. I was wondering if it was
That's when it's
automatic.
So not only did the Concom talked about it. I'm sorry, not only did the select board talk about it, but the FinCom did, and CPC did, and Concom. So it's like, there's a ton of information. I was saying before, like, one of the, I have this one theory that if you want people to do it, right? And so part of that is the voting. A lot of people open their heart when they get here, or just pay. And so they don't have an opportunity to do what they want. And that's something that really access to it. Yep. Sure. Different thing. Yep.
I'm just going to hold it while I read it, and then once it's voted on, I'll hand it over.
Yep, well, those are other issues. It's not so it does sometimes seem like it's yeah. Literally yeah. It just depends. That depends. Yeah. Yep. Okay. What is it that you said?
Oh.
Announce.
Okay. So, folks, we're almost ready, but someone dropped a phone. It's got a black case. Is this Mr. Wood? It's been chirping, Rick.
Yep.
All right, let's come back to order. If everyone could take your seats. All right, so Ms. Bailey has offered the following motion. A motion to amend the main motion under Article 13-6 of the 2024 Annual Town Meeting warrant to strike 74 Cherry Street. Is there a second? Okay. Can someone raise your hand just to identify a second?
Natalie
right.
Bowers.
Natalie Bowers, thank you. Ms. Bailey, you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would move that we strike 74 Cherry Street for several reasons. The first being that although Mr. Pohl has pointed out it is not under a 61 chapter land, it does have significant amount of the property under a permanent conservation restriction. So we don't really need an additional restriction on it because most of it is already preserved. Also, it is currently under agreement to be sold, and our ability to purchase that at this point is probably null. So to reserve money for something we are never going to do seems to be a waste of our time. Thank you.
All right, would anyone like to speak on the motion to amend that Ms. Bailey has offered, which is up on the screen, to strike 74 Cherry Street from motion 13-6? All right, seeing no one else approach the microphones to speak on the motion to amend, we will now vote on the motion to amend. A yes vote is to adopt Ms. Bailey's motion and strike 74 Cherry Street from the main motion, which we'll come back to. A no vote is to make no change to the motion that Mr. Woodland offered as the main motion. Voting is now open. We'll give it 5 more seconds, folks. And voting is closed. The motion to amend passes 94 to 31. So now we have back on the floor the main motion, which has now been amended by removing the language 74 Cherry Street. Would anyone else like to speak on the main motion? This has been some great debate, folks, but I think we are kind of coming to the end of it. But if anyone else would like to speak, Mr. Calaruso, since you were answering questions earlier on behalf of the commission, the Concom, I will now recognize you for 3 minutes if you would like to speak personally.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be really quick. I wanted to point out 3 things that maybe not be clear. One, the commission does not have an open wallet here to spend indiscriminately. We identified properties, but more importantly, the select board has the final say on whether the town affects the purchase. So it's not going to be up to me or fellow commission members exclusively. There's a check and balance here. Second, I think the 74 Cherry Street is an example of why we need to do this. We need to get out in front of these properties before they're on the market and sold, if we have any hope of actually preserving the open space. Allowing the Concom to have the funds allows us to enter into discussions early in the process. And I think that's really critical to make these things happen. And the third thing is, by not voting for this, it's not like you're going to get the money back. The money is already in the CPC. And I think the point was well made that since 2005, we haven't purchased any open space. We spent it on other worthy projects, but we have not spent it on open space, which is one of the original intents of this legislation in the first place.
All right, thank you, Mr. Calaruso. Yes, go ahead in the rear.
Nancy Waddell, 5 Great Pond Road. I'm a little concerned here, and I don't learn everything that happens in my household, so I try to take things in, but I'm hearing that there's a master plan that is going to be coming out, is out to some people. I haven't seen it yet. And we're trying to make decisions about this town. There's a property up here that we weren't even told was for sale, that we were supposed to be voting on. Now I'm wondering about the other 2 properties. Will the master plan suggest that we take one of these properties and do something else with it? I don't know, but I'm a little uncomfortable voting on 2 properties without seeing the master plan and not knowing. We didn't know about 74 Cherry Street. What don't we know about these other 2 properties?
I have a motion.
Mr. Waddell, you've already been recognized on this motion twice. I'm not going to allow a third one, I'm sorry.
To make a new motion?
No.
To make an amendment, I'm sorry.
No, you've been heard twice on the motion. Once by way of a vote of the meeting. I'm not going to allow a third, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Cheeseman.
Cheeseman, 75 Pleasant Street. I just want to remind everyone that the matrix that was referred to, the master plan, there may be some confusion. There was a master plan portion that was passed by the Open Space and Rec Committee that created this matrix. The CPC adopted those top priority properties within this motion. Clearly, as we've seen from February to now, that the situation on one piece of property has changed. But we're in a situation now where we are down to the last few large pieces of property in town, and if we truly want to have open space and recreation or purpose it otherwise, that we need to be in a position to buy these properties or to look at them or negotiate or make a deal or get assistance from Greenbelt or other outside agencies to make that happen. You are voting here only to move money that was already set aside for conservation, plus some others, into another conservation fund in the town. The decision after the Conservation Commission would come to the Select Board, and I would favor that because the Select Board and the Conservation Commission can make immediate moves to purchase this property, and as we get information that others might be available, we can get ahead of other competition and get in there before the entire development is started and the prices go up. So I recommend a yes vote, as has the Select Board.
All right. So we will now vote on the amended motion 6 under Article 13. Can we get the motion up on the screen, Michelle? Back to 6. And again, just ignore the 74 Cherry Street language, which has been stricken. So a yes vote approves moving funds to the Conservation Fund to allow the town to purchase or restrict or acquire conservation restriction, as council has indicated, one or more of the now 2 identified properties for open space and recreation. A no vote opposes moving the funds. A vote on this requires a simple majority. The voting is now open. Just one motion. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm closing the vote. The motion carries 101 to 28. Mr. Woodland, will you proceed now to motion 7?
Motion 7, I move to appropriate the sum of $69,631 from the Community Preservation Fund Affordable Housing Reserve as a grant to Wenham Affordable Housing Trust and described more fully in the application filed with the Community Preservation Committee, and further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into a grant agreement with the Affordable Housing Trust on such terms and conditions as the board seems appropriate, as long as the Select Board keeps the CPC apprised of their progress.
Is there a second? Yes. All right. The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on this motion? All right, seeing no one approach the microphone, we will now vote on motion 7 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the grant to the Wenham Affordable Housing Trust. A no vote opposes the grant. This is a simple majority. Voting is now open. And we'll give it 5 more seconds. And the voting is closed. The motion passes 115 to 10. Mr. Woodland, please proceed.
Only 2 more to go, folks, and I'm done. Motion number 8, I move to appropriate the sum of $35,000 from the Community Preservation Fund fiscal year 24 budgetary reserve as a grant to the Wenham Village Improvement Society for the restoration and sustainable preservation of the historic Wenham Tea House, specifically for the purchase and installation of new windows, and described more fully in the application filed with the Community Preservation Committee, and further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into a grant agreement with the Wenham Village Improvement Society on such terms and conditions as the Select Board deems appropriate, as long as the Select Board keeps the CPC apprised of their progress.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on this motion? Seeing no one approach the microphones, we will vote on motion 8 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the grant to the Wenham Village Improvement Society for purchasing and installing windows at the tea house. A no vote opposes the grant. This is a simple majority. Voting is now open. We'll give it 5 more seconds. We'll close the vote. The motion passes 109-10. 109-10, excuse me. 109 yeas, 10 nays. Mr. Woodland, please proceed with our last motion under Article 13.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Motion 9, I move to appropriate the sum of $18,000 with $16,155 coming from the Community Preservation Fund Open Space and Recreation Reserve and $1,845 coming from the Community Preservation Fiscal Year Budgetary Reserve for Conservation Commission trail signage at the Reynolds Farm in West Wenham Playground, and described more fully in the application filed with the Community Preservation Committee. And further, to authorize the Select Board to enter into a memorandum of agreement with the Conservation as may be necessary or desirable on such terms and conditions as the Board deems appropriate, as long as the Select Board keeps the CPC apprised of their progress.
Is there a second on the motion? Motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on this motion? Could someone please raise your hand to identify a second for the clerk? We have Ms. Bucco. All right, would anyone like to speak on this motion? Seeing no one approach the microphone, we will now vote on motion 9 under Article 13. A yes vote approves the use of fund for the trail signage. A no vote opposes that use. Simple majority. Voting is now open. We'll give it 5 more seconds. We'll close the vote. The motion passes 109 to 11. Thank you, Mr. Woodland.
Thank you for your continued support. Thank you.
All right, on to Article 14. If Gary Cheeseman of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 14, I will entertain the motion.
Move to approve Article 14 as printed in the warrant.
Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? Seeing no one approach the microphone, we will vote on the motion under Article 14. A yes vote adds the new bylaw to the town's bylaws. A no vote makes no changes to the town bylaws. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority. Voting is now open. We'll give it 5 more seconds. We'll close the vote. The motion carries 107 to 8. Article 15, to move from elected Board of Health to appointed Board of Health. If Peter Clay of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 15, I will entertain the motion.
I move to approve Article 15 as printed in the warrant.
Peter, can you turn on your microphone?
I move to approve Article 15 as printed in the warrant.
Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion?
Andrew Ting, 23 Burnham Road. I'm the chair of the Board of Health, and this warrant came to being after the Select Board asked me to give a status of the, or sort of state of the Board of Health a couple months ago. And in that, the Department of Public Health, Office of Local and Regional Health Boards came out with new standards for all local boards of health. This is the first time that any standards have been implemented, and it's going to require all boards of health to meet certain requirements in terms of education and resources and emergency preparedness. And through the pandemic, we learned that we needed to use the resources of our local boards of health that surround us, the surrounding towns. We did a great job, I think, during the pandemic, and I'd like to thank all those in the Board of Health and who volunteered, and I have to say my wife, who's the public health nurse. From that, we learned that it is potential that regionalizing our Board of Health may be in our future at some point to make it more efficient and add more resources, especially when we do many public health events already with the town of Hamilton. In order to do that, though, our boards are arranged differently. Theirs are appointed and ours is elected. So this warrant potentially will allow us in the future, if the town deems it, to regionalize and then combine our resources to have a better reaction rate and the ability to be more nimble and scalable in the future. So that is where that warrant comes from.
Would anyone else like to speak on the motion under Article 15?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Ms. Harrison.
Catherine Harrison, 49 Pleasant Street. Thank you very much, Dr. Ting, for giving us some reasons. That would have been my first, I can't help it, I'm height challenged. That would have been my first question for some reasons, so thank you for that. I have a general question about moving, in this case in particular, from elected to appointed. When we've been talking about town clerk, and I know that's not on the warrant, but we talked about taking someone who was a volunteer and perhaps turning them into an employee, so elected to appointed. Is this saying the same thing, that we now have volunteers that are elected to our Board of Health, but if we vote to move to an appointed Board of Health, that we're now going to be hiring people and paying them to be on the Board of Health, or are they just appointed in a different way, volunteers that come forward from the town and they get appointed by the select board?
I'll address the question to the town administrator.
So it would be different from the town clerk in that this would be an appointed official similar to other appointed committees and boards, and the requirement in the bylaws that they must be a resident of the town of Wenham. So the residency requirement would not change.
Okay. And just clarify, I think something you said, unless they are appointed, our Board of Health is appointed, we will not be able to potentially regionalize with other boards of health in the future? Is that what I understood?
So, Ms. Harrison, that's a question you're asking.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Through the moderator.
I believe that Dr. Ting would probably be the one who has information on this. No, actually, the town administrator wants to chime in, so let's go to Mr. Poulos.
Right, so from my understanding, in order to regionalize, so we're looking at a situation where, joining a larger regional board of health would change the makeup and the amount of members in an elected board. So the first step, and probably a couple steps, would be to go to appointed, particularly that, this is a multi-year process. So a yes vote in this doesn't make it appointed tomorrow. It will take 3 years for the members or the elected individuals to go through their terms, and essentially, as a member's term comes up, that seat becomes appointed, and then over a number of years, 3 years, the whole board will become appointed, then giving us more flexibility to not have to have that 3-year waiting period in order to act on a regional opportunity if it's deemed appropriate.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Bailey.
Michelle Bailey, 2 Remington Road. When we voted, I think it was in the last town meeting, to move to having from an elected town clerk to an appointed town clerk, there was then the requirement for a ballot vote. Or is there going to be a ballot vote requirement for these?
It says so right in the article.
And if so, when will that ballot be held?
So it does say that right in the article, Ms. Bailey. Will also require the approval of voters of the town at the 2025 town election. So that's the answer to that question. Yes, at the rear microphone, go ahead.
Sadie Alexander, 231 Larch Row. As I understand it, as you've said that the Wenham resident requirement still remains, we're effectively only removing the town's ability to vote on who is on this board and giving that power to the select board?
Yes,
From elected by the
that is the
town.
pragmatic effect of the motion.
But this isn't in any way giving us better candidates. It's still just people who live in the town. We have the same pool of possible people to do the job.
That's a statement of opinion, certainly. It is just moving the mechanism for appointing, from electing the Board of Health officials to appointing them by the Select Board, though. That is correct, yes.
All right.
All right. Anything else on the motion under Article 15? Seeing no one approach the microphone, we will now vote on the motion under Article 15. A yes vote starts the process of making the Board of Health appointed rather than elected, subject to the applicable law and ballot question referenced at next year's town election. A no vote keeps the Board of Health elected. A vote on this requires simple majority. Voting is now open. All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 93 to 23. On to Article 16, to move from elected Board of Assessors to appointed Board of Assessors. If Peter Clay of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 16, I will entertain it.
I move to approve Article 16 as printed in the warrant.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on this motion?
Michelle Bailey, 2 Remington Road, former
Miss Bailey.
assessor. I guess my question is why? I understand what Mr. Ting just said. My question here is why. I know we've had difficulty finding people to be elected to be the assessor. However, the Board of Selectmen are always welcome to go and ask anybody in the town to run for election in the same way they would recruit people to be appointed. Additionally, when we're talking about qualifications, when you are elected to be an assessor, you are required by law to take a several-hour training course. So whether someone's qualified or not to be on the Board of Assessors, they're provided the training to be qualified. So I would encourage us to vote no.
Ms. Bucco.
Diane Bucco, 73 Topsfield Road. As far as changing from elected to appointed for certain boards, I don't really understand why people don't like to run for election. I think it's kind of fun. It's not very difficult, but a lot of people don't like to do it. Therefore, I think finding people out of the same group of people, it will be easier to fill these boards. It's been, since I've been a clerk here and more active in the town, there's been twice when there are not full boards and we have to pull someone in or someone gets written in by accident. So moving to appointed will make it easier for lots of people. They don't have to worry about running again for election and taking out papers and getting those difficult 21 signatures. I think everyone should get elected. I think it's really good, but that's not the way it is. So I would recommend that we do move to an appointed Board of Assessors for that reason. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mary Beth Ting, 23 Burnham Road. My question is one of motivation, actually. So we have amazing people who live here in Wenham, and when I drive past the electronic signboard outside of the fire station, many, many times a year I see board and committee positions open, please volunteer. So my question is probably not one that's going to be answered today, but just to pose, how are we going to encourage our fellow residents to step up and serve on boards and committees? And to follow along with that, are there things that we can do to make a newcomer feel comfortable and understand what their role is so that people will be willing to step up and serve and not feel like, oh, I don't have the requisite knowledge to do this job appropriately? And so how can the select board attract the type of people that we need so that we're no longer seeing boards and committee positions available, please volunteer? We'll be fully staffed and people are anxious to volunteer and we're not constantly looking, but rather we're saying, oh, well, not this time we're fully staffed. come back to us, we'll check back with you next year. That would be an ideal situation, that we have many, many people, more people willing to serve than we have availability.
Thank you, Ms. Ting. Mr. Poulos, do you want to remark upon that?
A little bit on that, but just in general.
Sure, go ahead.
So, right, in an environment with, inflation and difficulty finding professional staff, particularly in the assessor's office, we've seen a large retirement in the last probably 10 years, so it's a difficult position to hire for. Additionally, the town of Wenham has gone several election cycles with an open seat on the Board of Assessors and has had difficulty recruiting for that position. We believe that going to appointed would help that, and additionally, similar to the vein of thought in the Board of Health, the Mara Healy administration has recently introduced the Municipal Empowerment Act, and in part of that act is allowing communities to regionalize their boards of assessors to essentially combine forces. We already have one foot in that door with a shared chief assessor who essentially does the job twice. In a regionalization effort, it would reduce that to keeping essentially one set of valuation models and streamlining the process for in turn saving the community's money and making the process more efficient. So I just wanted to add that as a reason to going from elected to appointed, because again, it's a multi-year process, just like the Board of Health. It would go through, it would be, essentially a 3-year, 4-year process from 3 years from the 2025 election, 4 years from now.
Thank you, Mr. Poulos. Ms. Reed? Can we get...
Trudy Reed,
There we go.
53 Topsfield Road. I probably should have asked this at the last article, but like we did last year with the town clerk's position, we sent it to legislation for their approval. Do we have to do it with these two positions, and why not?
No, so if you look at the articles, both articles reference voting in accordance with Chapter 41, Section 1B of the general laws. That's the statutory mechanism for going from an elected to an appointed official. That was an option that was before town meeting last year, and last year on the town clerk vote, town meeting chose to do the special act process instead.
Thank you.
Ms. Carr?
Jennifer Carr, 5 Meridian Road, Wenham. My concern is going to an appointed position for the assessor's office will discourage younger people or people new to the community from putting themselves forward. I mean, I look at all of us, including us on the school committee, and let's be honest, there might be 1 or 2 of us under 30. Sorry. But most of us aren't. If this assessor position, like all our other positions, becomes an appointed position, I truly believe it will discourage people who are young from stepping forward to hold office in these positions, because people who are in their 20, 21, 22, they probably might not know anybody on the select board. So it may make them uncomfortable. That's my only concern.
Sir, in the rear.
Jeremy Gross, 231 Larch Row. Might I suggest an amendment to say that the position be elected, but should nobody run, that the select board can appoint someone to cover the case in which somebody does not run for that seat?
So town council can expand upon this. If you want to make a motion to amend, you can make a motion to amend, but that motion would be of dubious legality.
Okay.
It's not possible.
Okay.
All right. Seeing no one else at the microphones, we will now vote on the motion under Article 16. A yes vote starts the process of making the Board of Assessors appointed rather than elected pursuant to the statute in question and subject to a ballot question at next year's annual election. A no vote keeps the Board of Assessors elected as is. A vote on this requires simple majority. Voting is now open. We'll give it about 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 78 to 35. On to Article 17, Community Septic Loan Program. And I'm just going to note at the outset that this will be a 2/3 majority vote. This article seeks to enable the town to request the Commonwealth set aside funds from its Clean Water Trust to be used to fund the repair or replacement of septic systems that have failed Title V inspection, which funds will be borrowed by residents as a loan and which will be repaid by the residents, all under terms established by the town. So now, if Deidre Parati of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 17, I will entertain the motion.
No, it's on. Move to appropriate the sum of $500,000 for purposes of financing the following water pollution abatement facility projects: repair, replacement, and/or upgrade of septic systems pursuant to agreements between the Board of Health and residential property owners for repayment of project and financing costs by such property owners, including without limitation the payment of all costs thereof as defined in Section 1 of Chapter 29C of the Massachusetts General Laws, and as funding therefore to authorize the treasurer, with the approval of the Select Board, to borrow said sum pursuant to General Law, Chapter 111, Section 127B and a half, or General Law, Chapter 29C, through the Community Septic Management Program offered through the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust, or any other enabling authority, and to authorize the Select Board or Board of Health to apply for, accept, and expend any grants that may be received for such purposes, and to execute all documents as may be necessary to effectuate the purposes of this article.
Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. As this motion proposes action with financial implications for the town, I will invite the FinCom to make a recommendation. Mr. Calder?
FinCom met a little earlier this afternoon to consider this and recommends 5-0 in support.
Thank you, Mr. Calder. Would anyone like to speak on the motion?
Deb Evans, 12 Porter Street. A couple of questions that are more clarifying. So it appears that, tell me if I've got any of this wrong, that if someone's septic has failed, this part of this program will be to financially support the replacement of said system. What happens, is there a municipal lien that gets put on the property? How do we, not guarantee, but how do we maximize the probability that said kind of temporary financing gets paid back?
All right, I'll either invite the town administrator or the finance director to provide any information.
Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff Soulard, Finance Director. So the way the program works is, as you said, there's a documented failure of the septic system. They work with the Board of Health, get it approved and paid for through the program. Town fronts the money. We get money back from the Clean Water Trust. The resident enters into a betterment agreement with the town, which becomes a lien on the property. It gets amortized each year. It gets put on their tax bill, usually for 20 years, paid back sort of like a mortgage. But the town has a full lien on the property. It's part of the tax bill, and if, like any other property, if you're not paying your tax bill in full, the town can move forward with tax-taking procedures and things like that. Just to offer some context, my town, Essex, is involved in this program for $1 million. It's worked really, really well. We've never had any issues with payments, having to execute our liens or anything like that.
Okay, in my experience, typically people are doing Title V inspections not necessarily voluntarily when they're planning to sell their homes. Few people do that as a matter of course. So in your scenario, if they're not paying if they sell their house, they're not paying taxes. Where in that chain of financing does the repayment come in if it's not going to be done over 20 years?
If they sold their home, it would be part of the municipal lien certificate that would be pulled, and either, and what we're seeing more frequently is the banks or mortgage companies in that scenario would force the full payment of the betterment at that point in time, or it would transfer with the property to the new owner. So it would continue to be a lien that the town had. But our experience with betterments in particular over the last 5 or 6 years is that at closing, we get paid in full, which expedites our payment back.
Okay. Yeah. So the $500,000 that's being asked for, where is that coming from?
So the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust is an agency of the Mass government. They have a big pool of money. They offer this program to any community, but communities have to opt in like we're doing here. Once the communities do, then you can participate up into what you've authorized. Typically, they will break it up into several tranches. They won't give you $500,000 up front. They'll say, here's 200 or something like that. But the town's sort of skin in the game is someone gets a plan, $40,000 to fix a septic system. It goes through the Board of Health, it's approved, and ideally, the town would actually cut a check directly to, say, a vendor who did the work. Sometimes we see it where it is that a homeowner maybe has already done some of the work and reimburse them. But we would front the money. Then the Clean Water Trust will actually reimburse the town. And that usually takes anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. Basically, the holdup you have to wait for is the next time the board of the Clean Water Trust meets, that's when they will approve an authorization to send the money back to the town of Wenham. So in my experience, it's never been more than 6 weeks that you're sort of fronting this money. Then at that point, what's left is, at some point, they take whatever we have in the system, 500,000 or 200,000, they package that up into a much greater bond that gets sold in the marketplace. Once that bond is sold in the marketplace, we begin a payback period, an amortization, just like a mortgage. Typically, the way it works is that takes some time. So we actually have a betterment in place with the homeowner. We're collecting money for, say, a year or 18 months before the bond is even sold and amortized. So by the time that we have to actually make some of these debt payments, we've already got a special revenue fund that has funding in there to pay those that debt service for that particular year back. And that it would be a town meeting vote we would take every year. It would become an article every year in town meeting to pay the Clean Water Trust bond.
That's helpful. Just more down in the weeds. Where is what line item does the $500,000 come from in the Wenham budget, and where is it?
It would be sort of out of sort of what you think of the Wenham operating budget. It would be what is called a special revenue fund under Mass DOR rules.
Okay.
And that fund, all the betterment payments would go directly in there, and they would stay there until the payments are due on the bonds once they're sold. So there would be this special revenue fund sitting with funds in it, and at some point, the bond would be sold and we would begin to pay back. But in terms of the Wenham budget, it doesn't, other than fronting money up front to pay the expenses for that 3 to 6 weeks that I mentioned, that's the only time the town of Wenham has skin in the game, so to speak.
Okay, and we have adequate staffing now to implement said program?
Yeah, and just to give you some context on that, I mean, if we think a septic system costs, $50,000, you're talking about 10 betterments. So it's we're not going to have hundreds of these things to administer. So yeah, I don't see it being an issue in terms of staffing in the finance
So who
department.
administers it? Your group?
So the treasurer is tasked with all bonding for the town. So she would handle filling out the Clean Water Trust paperwork. And then the assessor's department, basically you'd have the Board of Health would be involved on the front end of the actual mechanics of the Title V issues. The treasurer would apply for the bonding with the Clean Water Trust, and then the assessor would be involved in putting the betterments in place on the properties and ensuring that they get put on the tax bills each year. But I don't believe there's such a large number of parcels that would be involved that any of it would be a material issue.
And there's a vetting process of who actually is able to apply for the funds?
So the vetting process is it's only based on the need in terms of having a septic issue. It is not something that is sort of means-based. So, somebody that is down to their last dollar or somebody worth $10 billion can both apply for the program.
Thanks. Please don't mistake my questions as negative. I'm just trying to get clarification.
Sure.
Would anyone else like to speak on the motion under Article 17? Seeing no one else approach the microphones, we will now vote on the motion. A yes vote authorizes the town to borrow the funds through the state's Clean Water Trust program for the septic system repairs, replacements, and upgrades, as just described all by the finance director. A no vote declines such authorization. A vote on this motion does require a 2/3 vote. The voting is now open. And we'll give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 99-10. On to Article 18, amending the zoning bylaw for outdoor storage or stockpiling of junk. Article 18 proposes a zoning bylaw amendment. If Ben Timon of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 18, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to approve Article 18 as set forth in the warrant.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. I note that as reflected in the warrant book, the Planning Board, having held a public hearing, unanimously voted recommending favorable action on this article. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? All right, seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on the motion under Article 18. A yes vote adds the new section to the town's zoning bylaws. A no vote makes no change to the zoning bylaws. This motion requires a 2/3 vote. Voting is now open. And we'll give it about 5 more seconds. We'll close the vote. The motion carries 90-17. On to Article 19. The ban of single-use plastic bags. Article 19 proposes amending the town's general bylaws by adding a new section concerning single-use plastic bags by businesses in town. If Deirdre Parati of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 19, I will entertain the motion.
Move to approve Article 19 as set forth in the warrant.
Thank you. Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? Go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Chris Thompson, 24 Rubley. I'll be quick. You know, in other instances of banning these kind of things around the country, we've run into things where there's instances like, say, the plastic straws, where it really was damaging to people with disabilities. Has that been considered with the single-use plastic bags? Are there any instances where there are health and safety or considerations for people with special needs that this is going to prevent from helping those folks?
Does anyone from the Select Board wish to address the question?
Not to my knowledge. I've not heard that before.
Did you actually look at it?
Not that specifically, no.
Okay. Great.
Go ahead, Ms. Alexander.
Sadie Alexander, 231 Larch Row. Would this apply to plastic bags that are compostable? I know there are certain brands or purchasable plastic bags that do decompose naturally and don't pose such a threat to the environment.
Would the Select Board like to address the question?
As far as my knowledge goes, those typically, the decomposing bags typically tend to be like fruit storage bags and so for produce, which are secondary. So this is banning point-of-sale bags, which I'm not aware of any that are actually biodegradable.
Okay.
Ms. Thompson, go ahead.
Alicia Thompson, 24 Rubley Road. I guess my big question, I don't have a for or against on this really, as much as a, would it be possible, or am I missing the fact that maybe we have some recycling stations for these types of bags that, you know, we all have them in some capacity, and we reuse them for many, many purposes, but quite often I get packages from Amazon that say, you know, has to be taken to a special recycling facility, and I just don't know where any are. So could anyone address where those type of recycling places, do we have any in town?
I mean, based on my own knowledge and research, these types of plastic bags really don't get recycled. It's a very low recycling rate, and I don't believe they're accepted in town recycling. They typically end up sort of blowing around or getting incinerated, typically, or end up in a landfill.
Okay, I think somebody had told me that Stop and Shop in Beverly has a recycling location. Does anybody happen to know if that's the case, or?
Some of the supermarkets do have a receptacle where you can put your plastic bags, but I think there's not assurance that those actually eventually do get recycled.
Right, okay. I just was curious if does anybody know if there's a place in, like closer, like in our towns that do that? No? Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Again, if anyone wants to remark, I would just ask that you wait to be recognized.
Can I add one?
Yeah, Deirdre, go ahead.
I would just add that the text of this article is what's recommended by the Sierra Club, so they put out this language that's been very well researched by the Sierra Club to help municipalities adopt these types of bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on the motion under Article 19? Seeing no one approach the microphones, we'll now vote on the motion under Article 19. A yes vote will add the new section regarding the use of single-use plastic bags by businesses to the general bylaws. A no vote will make no change to the bylaws. This motion requires a simple majority. Voting is now open. Excuse me, sir, are you recording in the back, sir? I'd ask that you not record the meeting without permission. Thank you. All right, we'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 81 to 24. All right, Article 20. A resolution regarding the change of the state flag and seal. So Article 20 proposes this resolution. If Diane Bucco of the Select Board wishes to make the main motion under Article 20, I will entertain the motion.
I move to approve Article 20 as set forth in the warrant.
Thank you. Is there a second? Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. I do just want to note that as a resolution, this is essentially a sense of the meeting. We're not doing anything with our bylaws or anything like that. It's just a directive by the meeting in a sense of the meeting. So, anyone like to speak on it? All right, seeing no one approach the microphones, we will now vote on the motion under Article 20. A yes vote supports the town making the resolution. A no vote opposes making the resolution. A vote on this motion requires a simple majority, and voting is now open. We'll give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 88 to 15. Okay, on to Article 21, which proposes revoting to clarify an amendment made to Section 5-34-2 of the general bylaws at the 2022 Fall Special Town Meeting. If Diane Bucco wishes to make the main motion under Article 21, I will entertain the motion.
I move to approve Article 21 as set forth in the warrant.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Would anyone like to speak on the motion? I'm gonna hear from, and actually, we do have a slide. Michelle, do you want to bring up the slide that we prepared that shows the It might be hidden, we might have to unhide it. We have a slide that shows this section as it existed prior to the 2022 special town meeting in a little bit more context with the rest of the section. But yes, while that's happening, go ahead, Ms. Harrison.
Catherine Harrison, 49 Pleasant Street. I'd like to make a motion to amend this, very simply for clarification purposes, if I may.
Go ahead.
So I move to amend the main motion under Article 21 of the 2024 Annual Town Meeting warrant to read, move to amend Section 5-34-2 of the Town Bylaws, Community Preservation Committee, to impose a term limit of 3 terms on committee members, so that the section provides as follows. All members of the Community Preservation Committee, CPC, shall be appointed for a term of 3 years. Any member, at large or designated, after serving for 3 consecutive terms, shall be ineligible for reappointment until after the succeeding annual town meeting. Any vacancy of the Community Preservation Committee shall be filled for the unexpired term by the entity responsible for the original appointment.
Is there a second on the motion to amend? Second. All right, the motion has been made and seconded. Ms. Harrison, do you have anything more that you want to add on your motion?
Just a comment.
Yeah, please, you have
The whole
2
purpose-
minutes or so left.
I won't even take that. The whole purpose of amending this motion is actually, having attended the warrant hearing, the main motion seemed to still be unclear, so this is an attempt to just make it as simple and as clear as possible, and also to move it to 3 terms rather than a number of years. The number of years that was in the main motion does not correspond to a certain number of terms. That's all this is proposing to do. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Ms. Harrison. Would anyone? Yes. Yeah, we have it in writing. I think Michelle still has it, but do you have the motion that Ms. Harrison submitted? The paper copy? Yeah, just make sure Kirsten has it for the clerk's file. Okay, would anyone else like to speak on the motion to amend that Ms. Harrison has offered? Ms. Bailey, I take it you're waiting on to return to the main motion? Okay. No one else approaching the microphone on the motion to amend. We will now vote on that motion. So a yes vote is to take the language that Ms. Harrison has offered, which now shows up on the screen, and use that instead of the language in your warrant book. A no vote keeps the main motion the way it appears in the warrant book. Voting is now open on the motion to amend. And if I didn't say so already, the motion to amend is a simple majority. We'll give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion to amend carries 82 to 5. So we can now leave, we can leave that up. We can switch it back to the slides, leave the motion to amend up, because that's now basically the main motion, which we'll return to. Yeah, switch it back to the slides, please. Okay, so this is now the main motion, essentially, the text anyway. Ms. Bailey.
With regards to the main motion, I do not feel like your description of why we were voting is completely accurate, and I would like the whole story to be told. At the last meeting, there was a proposal to limit just the at-large members, and I made a motion to make it apply to all, and I put in the number 10 based on another committee that had both elected, or both members coming from boards and at-large members. And the town meeting approved that. The town then submitted, based on inaccurate minutes, the motion pretty much the way it had been written prior to the amendment to the government and that, to the, whatever, the Attorney General, and that was approved. The will of this body last year was never given the opportunity to be considered. And instead of doing that, the Board of Selectmen decided to take the route and have us revote. It's very important that this pass, but the fact that someone did not own their mistake is very upsetting, and that you disenfranchised the voters.
I'll assume that the reference to you is to the town in general, Ms. Bailey? Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Would anyone from the administration or the select board like to add anything? Okay, would anyone else like to speak on the motion now as amended? All right, seeing no one else approach the microphone, we will now vote on the motion under Article 21 as amended. A yes vote will amend the general bylaws as now set forth in Ms. Harrison's amendment. A no will make no change to the bylaws. So this is the main motion. Now we're deciding whether this language goes into the bylaws or we keep them as is. This motion requires a simple majority. Voting is now open. We'll give it 5 more seconds. And we'll close the vote. The motion passes 90-6. Before we get to our last article, I do want to recognize Gary Cheeseman and Peter Clay of the Select Board as they have a special presentation to make.
One moment, please. I'd just like to take a moment to say thank you to Diane Bucco, who is retiring off the Select Board. She's been the chair this year and led us through the complicated period of moving from 5 to 3 and otherwise. She's a little shy today.
Thank you very much.
All right. I take it Ms. Bucco doesn't want to be recognized further for remarks, but thank you. From the moderator as well, thank you. It's been a great journey working with you. All right, Article 22 is our annual election of officers. Now, when the town meeting form of government developed, this would be done at town meeting itself. We would have an election here right on the floor. But in modern times, we do this through the annual town election, which will be held this Thursday, April 11th, 2024, at Town Hall. So we'll not vote on this article today other than a motion to adjourn until the conclusion of the election. Before entertaining that motion, I will read the list of officers who are to be elected on Thursday. Town moderator for a term of 3 years. 1 member of the select board for a 3-year term. 2 members of the Hamilton Wenham Regional Library trustee, both for 2-year terms. 3 members of the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee, 2 for 3-year terms and 1 for a 2-year term. 1 member of the Board of Assessors for a 3-year term. 1 member of the Board of Health for a 3-year term. 1 member of the Planning Board for a 5-year term. 1 member of the Water Commission for a 3-year term, and 2 members of the Wenham Housing Authority, 1 for a 5-year term and 1 for a 4-year term. Additionally, as noted in the warrant book, Thursday's election will include 1 ballot question regarding the vote taken at last year's town annual meeting to change the town clerk position from elected to appointed. That question reads, shall an act passed by the general court entitled, quote, an act changing the position of town clerk in the town of Wenham from an elected position to an appointed position, close quote, be accepted? So we have now come to the end of our business for today. Please, however, remain in your seats for a few more minutes. I thank you all for your patience, your participation, and for the lively yet civil debate. I also want to thank again everyone who assisted with the setup of town meeting today. Before you leave, please return your voting cards and your clickers to the volunteers in the foyer. Now, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the 2024 annual town meeting until the conclusion of the annual election on Thursday, April 11th, 2024, at which time the 2024 annual town meeting will be dissolved.
So moved.
Is there a second? With the motion seconded, we will now take our final vote of the afternoon by show of voter cards. All those in favor, this is simple majority. Is anyone opposed to adjourning? No, I don't think so. The motion's unanimous. It carries. Have a great night. Thanks all for coming.